What if you discovered that like 95% of the time, effort, and money you spend trying to persuade people is completely invisible to the part of their brain that actually makes decisions?
I mean, it is a genuinely unsettling thought, isn't it? Especially for anyone operating in the professional world today, we spend weeks, sometimes months, building these incredibly elaborate pitch decks.
Right. We just pour over the details.
Exactly. We crunch the numbers, we refine the spreadsheets, we lay out these bulletproof logical arguments, and we're operating entirely on the assumption that the person sitting across the table from us is, a perfectly rational data evaluating machine.
Yeah, because we all desperately want to believe we are rational beings making logical choices.
Mm.
We want to believe our customers are weighing the pros and cons on a neat little mental scale, perfectly balancing cost against benefit.
Sure, it makes us feel in control.
Right, but the science of neuromarketing reveals a shocking truth about who is really in the driver's seat of our decisions. And spoiler alert, it is not the logical, rational part of the brain you think you are talking to,
Not even close. In fact, if you look at the neurological reality, aiming your pitch at the rational brain is arguably the most inefficient way to sell anything.
which is exactly why we are setting a very specific course today. In this deep dive, you're going to learn why targeting your customer's rational mind is a massive mistake.
A huge mistake.
Yeah, and how the vast majority of consumer decisions are actually driven by subconscious processes. This matters for anyone in business because understanding this neurological reality is the ultimate shortcut to stopping wasted effort and finally aligning your pitch with how the human brain actually buys.
It really is.
And we are pulling all of this from the foundational insights of Chapter 1 in the book Brainfluence by Roger Dooley, which has the incredibly fitting title, Sell to 95% of Your Customer's Brain.
And honestly, it is the only logical starting point for a discussion on persuasion. Because to truly grasp how to sell a product, pitch an idea, or persuade anyone of anything, you have to completely deconstruct your assumptions about the literal speed of thought.
The speed of thought. I love that phrasing.
Yeah, we have to look at how the architecture of the human brain intercepts and processes information long, long before we are even consciously aware that we are thinking about it.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because that title alone, Sell to 95% of Your Customer's Brain, it throws a massive wrench into traditional business logic. We're talking about the neuroscience of the subconscious here, right?
We are, yeah. And the foundational metric of this entire concept, the number that should make every single marketer, entrepreneur, or salesperson pause and rethink their entire strategy, comes from Gerald Zaltman.
And he's a marketing professor at Harvard Business School, right?
He is, and according to Zaltman's research, 95% of our thoughts, our emotions, and our learning happen entirely without our conscious awareness.
95%. I mean, just let that sit for a second. That is almost everything. That
Yeah.
means the conscious mind, the part of you that feels like you, the part listening to this deep dive right now, is only responsible for 5% of your cognitive activity.
It is the overwhelming majority of human cognitive processing. But the thing is, as staggering as that 95% figure is, in the realm of neuroscience, it might actually be a highly conservative estimate.
Wait, conservative? How could it possibly be more than 95%?
Well, according to A.K. Pradeep, the CEO of Neurofocus, which is a firm entirely dedicated to analyzing the buying brain, the subconscious brain activity, is actually estimated to be closer to 99.999%.
Come on, 99.999%. I have to push back on that a little bit.
Go for it.
That just makes it sound like we are literally just biological zombies operating on pure autopilot. If the conscious mind is just a 0.001% rounding error in the grand scheme of our brain's processing power, how do you explain complex, deliberate actions?
That is a very fair question.
Like, if that's true, why do I spend 3 weeks consciously researching a mortgage rate, comparing fixed versus variable, and running amortization calculators before I sign the paperwork? That feels pretty intensely conscious to me.
That is the perfect objection, and it gets right to the heart of how misunderstood the brain is. You feel like you spent 3 weeks consciously making that decision.
I really do.
But what the neurobiology suggests is that the underlying emotional drivers, your deep-seated need for security, your fear of financial ruin, your desire for the social status of homeownership, those were processed by the 99.999% of your subconscious almost instantaneously.
Oh, wow.
Right. So the conscious research you did with those amortization calculators, that was just your brain doing the necessary busy work to satisfy a decision that the deeper, older parts of your brain had already tilted toward.
So the conscious mind is doing the homework, but the subconscious already picked the major.
Exactly. Now, to be precise, the source material does pause to clarify a scientific nuance here because terminology really matters when we get into neurology.
Sure, scientists love their labels.
They do.
Okay.
And you will hear scientists fiercely debate the exact labels. Some prefer the term non-conscious because it doesn't carry the Freudian baggage.
Right, like id and ego and all that.
Exactly. And others argue for preconscious to maintain strict anatomical accuracy regarding how neural pathways route information before it reaches the prefrontal cortex. But for the sake of clarity, the author uses the term subconscious because it is the most culturally familiar to everyday readers.
That makes total sense.
Yeah, the label itself matters a lot less than the functional reality. And that reality is that there is a staggering, unfathomable amount of processing going on under the surface.
Okay, so if the conscious mind is only handling like 0.001% to 5% of the workload, what is it actually doing?
Good question.
It sounds like the conscious mind is just the tiny computer monitor sitting on your desk, but the subconscious is this massive, humming server farm in a basement somewhere doing all the actual processing in the dark.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. Think about the monitor on your desk. Your conscious awareness only displays the final outputs.
Just the pictures on the screen.
Right. It gives you the clean user interface. It shows you a little folder icon. It absolutely does not show you the millions of lines of binary code being executed, the routing of packets, the thermal regulation, or the heavy computational lifting.
Which would be overwhelming anyway.
Completely overwhelming.
Right.
So all that lifting happens in the server farm, in the dark, entirely away from your awareness.
And in the business world, we spend 100% of our time trying to talk to the monitor.
Exactly. We are tapping on the glass of the monitor, pointing at our spreadsheets, begging the screen to change the code in the server farm. It is a fundamental misunderstanding of the system's architecture.
Okay, but how can we possibly know the subconscious is doing 99% of the work? I mean, you can't put a microphone in the subconscious. How do we know the server farm is actually operating that far ahead of the monitor?
Well, we know because we can literally watch it happen electrically. We have scientific proof of this server farm working in the dark, processing complex information and reaching conclusions before the monitor even lights up.
Oh, this is the puzzle study, right?
Yes. And this brings us to what I consider the most terrifying and fascinating research in the entire chapter, involving electroencephalograph, or EEG, machines.
I love this part, the 8-second decision lag. This completely upends everything we think we know about free will in purchasing.
It really does. So researchers set up a study to observe the exact moment a decision is made. They gave test subjects a series of complex puzzles to solve.
Okay.
And while the subjects worked on these puzzles, the researchers monitored their brain activity using EEG machines.
So those who might not know it, an EEG is that cap they put on your head with all the little electrodes and wires attached to it, right?
Precisely. It is a non-invasive way to track the electrical patterns and impulses firing across different regions of the brain in real time. It doesn't read your thoughts, but it reads the electrical signatures of your brain's activity.
Oh, so they can see what areas are lighting up.
Yeah. When you are resting, it looks one way. When you are stressed, it looks another.
So they are essentially watching the server farm's power grid in real time.
Exactly. And the researchers were looking for a very specific electrical signature. They were looking for the pattern that correlated with the brain actually reaching the solution to the puzzle.
The moment it all clicks.
Neurologically speaking, they were looking for the exact millisecond of the aha moment.
And the shocking part is the timing.
The timing is everything. The EEG machines showed that the subjects' brains had solved the puzzle. The neural pattern for the solution fired brilliantly across the necessary regions up to 8 seconds before the subjects were consciously aware that they had figured it out.
8 seconds. I mean, I want everyone listening to just count out 8 seconds in their head. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
It's a long time.
In the realm of neurological processing, where things move at the speed of electrical impulses, 8 seconds is not just a delay. It is an absolute eternity.
It is a massive cavernous lag. The biological implication is profound, you know. There's a literal measurable delay in decision-making and realization. Our brains reach a decision before we, meaning our conscious monitor-level identity, even know it.
That is just wild to think about.
It really is. The server farm finishes the computation, solves the problem, and then it takes up to 8 seconds for that result to be packaged and pushed up to the monitor so your conscious mind can say, oh, I got it.
This is so critical for you to grasp if you are trying to persuade someone in any capacity. When you are pitching a client and they look at you, nod, and say, you know what, I've decided to buy, that is old news.
Very old news.
Their brain made the decision seconds, or perhaps even much earlier, under the surface. You must target the system that actually solves the puzzle, not the system that simply reports the answer later.
Right. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it changes the entire paradigm of communication. You aren't trying to convince the conscious mind to make a decision.
Because it doesn't make them.
Exactly. You are trying to provide the subconscious mind with the inputs it needs to arrive at the decision, knowing the conscious mind will just act as an echo chamber later.
So, if the conscious mind is always 8 seconds late to the party, what does that mean for how we currently talk to our customers? Because if I think about how most major businesses operate, they are obsessed with asking customers what they want.
Oh, constantly.
We ask them why they bought, what their intentions are for next quarter.
This raises an important question, and it points directly to the absolute doom of traditional customer research.
The doom.
Truly. If 95 to 99.999% of our decisions are made by the subconscious server farm, and the conscious mind is just a delayed reporting mechanism, then relying on what customers say is fundamentally biologically flawed.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Wait, so let me play devil's advocate for a second.
These do.
We all know the standard corporate playbook. Businesses spend millions, probably billions globally, on focus groups. They send out endless customer satisfaction surveys, detailed questionnaires, asking people exactly what they want and why they prefer product A over product B.
Yeah, mountains of data.
And this chapter is essentially saying that entire multi-billion-dollar research industry is basically useless.
It is saying that it is doomed to failure, yes. Efforts to tease out this information by directly asking customers questions are fundamentally asking the wrong system.
You're asking the monitor.
Right. Therefore, any marketing effort or product development cycle based primarily on self-reports, customer statements, stated preferences, or stated intentions is equally doomed.
That is a very tough pill to swallow for anyone who relies on data from a survey to justify their marketing budget.
It is, but you have to think about the why behind it. It's not that customers in a focus group are malicious.
Right, they aren't trying to sabotage you.
No, they aren't sitting there intentionally lying to you about why they bought a specific brand of toothpaste. It's that you are actively asking the 5% conscious brain to explain the complex emotional actions of the 95% subconscious brain.
And it simply does not have access to that data.
Because they literally do not know. The text explicitly warns about this phenomenon. Customers generally cannot understand or accurately explain why they make choices in the marketplace.
It's just a biological limitation.
Exactly. The conscious mind does not have access to the intricate, deeply emotional, and nonverbal calculations that the subconscious use to arrive at the decision.
It's like a firewall.
Yeah. The monitor cannot explain how the server farm generated the image. It only knows the image is there.
So what does the monitor do when you ask it a question it doesn't know the answer to? Does it just crash?
It invents an answer.
Hmm.
In neurology, this is known as confabulation.
Confabulation.
Right. If you ask the conscious mind why it made a choice and it doesn't know, it won't say, I don't know. It will instantly invent a plausible-sounding, highly logical reason based on the limited data it has, just to make sense of its own behavior.
It rationalizes.
It creates a rationalization after the fact.
Oh.
Let's look at a concrete example. Imagine someone buys a ridiculously expensive, bright red sports car.
Okay, classic midlife crisis purchase.
Right. If you put that buyer in a focus group and ask them, why did you choose this car? What are they going to say?
Oh, they are going to talk about the engineering. They'll say, well, the resale value is historically very strong. It has an incredible safety rating for its class.
Yeah.
And the aerodynamics provide excellent fuel efficiency on the highway.
Exactly. The conscious mind provides a list of highly logical, defensible data points, but the subconscious mind, the 95% that actually made the purchase, bought that car because of how the styling makes them feel successful.
Right, the status.
Yeah, it bought the car because of the deep evolutionary drive to signal status and dominance to peers or to attract a mate. But the conscious mind cannot or will not admit that. So it invents the narrative about resale value.
I have to admit, I have absolutely fallen for this myself.
We all do.
I remember buying this incredibly overpriced, heavy-duty cooler a few years ago. I spent hours reading about the polyurethane insulation and the bear-proof latches.
The bear-proof latches, that's great.
Yeah, and I live in a suburb. I have never encountered a bear in my life. But if you asked me why I bought it, I would have rattled off those specs.
Of course you would.
But in reality, I bought it because the branding made me feel rugged and outdoorsy. My subconscious wanted the identity. My conscious mind just used the bear-proof latches as the excuse.
That is the perfect illustration of confabulation. Your conscious mind needed a socially acceptable reason to justify a purely emotional purchase.
So for you listening, the practical takeaway here is huge. You need to stop relying solely on what customers say they want. Stated intentions are a trap.
A total trap.
You have to start analyzing the deeper subconscious drivers of behavior. You have to look at what they actually do, how they react on an emotional level to your brand, rather than just tallying up their survey responses.
Because if you build a product based on what the focus group says, you are building a product for the PR agent, not the person writing the check.
And this leads us to the next massive pitfall. If asking questions is doomed to fail because it targets the wrong part of the brain, then the way we actively pitch to customers is usually just as flawed for the exact same anatomical reason.
We are guilty of selling to the 5%.
Selling to the 5%. It sounds so obviously wrong when you say it out loud.
But that is the core, devastating takeaway of the chapter. Despite the mounting neuroscientific evidence, despite knowing for a fact that rational processes are just a tiny, delayed slice of human decision-making, marketers stubbornly focus their messaging almost entirely on that 5%.
We just can't help ourselves. We want to be logical. We want to be taken seriously in the boardroom, so we bring serious, logical presentations.
We project our own desire for rationality onto our customers. We want our business to seem rigorously analytical, so we assume our customers are rigorously analytical.
That's an ego thing for us, too.
Definitely. And the text lists the exact traps we fall into over and over again. What do? We bombard the customer with statistics. We provide exhaustive, bulleted feature lists. We present complex, multi-layered cost-benefit analyses.
We give them 20-page white papers detailing every technical specification and integration capability.
We do. We build these towering edifices of logic, assuming that if the logic is sound, if the math is undeniable, the customer must say yes.
But they don't always say yes.
No, because by doing this, we are entirely ignoring the vast emotional and nonverbal share of the customer's brain activity.
I mean, if you're pitching a product by listing 10 bullet points of technical specs, you are effectively trying to speak a language that 95% of your customer's brain doesn't even understand.
Right.
To go back to our analogy, you're handing a spreadsheet to a server farm. It doesn't process data that way. The server farm doesn't care about your Excel formatting.
That analogy perfectly captures the disconnect. The subconscious brain parts like the amygdala and the basal ganglia processes emotion, imagery, spatial relationships, and deep-seated survival cues like fear, status, and tribal belonging.
It's a primal.
Very primal. It operates on heuristics and feelings. It does not natively process a bulleted list of technical specifications.
Right.
So when you lead your pitch with a spreadsheet or a heavy logical argument, you are essentially asking the 5% of the brain to overpower the 95%. It is an unfair fight, and the spreadsheet almost always loses.
This means you need to audit your current sales pitches, your presentations, your website copy right now. Look at the top fold of your homepage. Are you leading with stats and features?
We are 20% faster than the competitor.
Yeah. Or we integrate with 50 APIs. Are you immediately trying to prove your value through complex logical arguments? If so, you are actively ignoring the vast majority of your customers' brain activity.
Which is a huge missed opportunity.
You are leaving 95% of your persuasive potential on the table because you are speaking the wrong neurological language.
Which is an enormous waste of resources, time, and money. It is the definition of friction in sales.
So what does this all mean? Should we just throw out facts and figures entirely? Do we just burn the white paper, show people pictures of puppies and majestic mountains, and hope they buy our enterprise software on pure vibes?
No, and that's the crucial nuance we have to get right here. The text is very clear on this. You do not abandon facts completely.
Okay, good. I can hear the engineers and business-to-business salespeople listening just breathing a massive sigh of relief.
Right, they can keep their white papers. Facts absolutely still have a role. There are conscious and rational parts to most decisions, especially in complex B2B sales or high-ticket consumer items.
So logic isn't dead.
Logic isn't dead. The key, however, is the order of operations. It is not about eliminating logic. It is about knowing when to deploy it in the neurological sequence.
The sequence is the secret.
Exactly. The text states you must focus first on appealing to the buyer's emotions and unconscious needs. You have to trigger the 95% first.
Win the server farm.
Yes, you have to win the battle in the server farm before you even bother talking to the monitor.
And what about the 5%? Where do the specs come in?
You include factual details, statistics, and features not to make the sale, but to help the customer's logical brain justify the decision the subconscious has already made.
Design your pitch to win the heart and provide the specs to protect the ego.
That is precisely it. Protect the ego? The subconscious makes the rapid emotional choice. I want this, this feels right, this solves my deeper anxiety, this elevates my status.
And then what?
Well, then the conscious mind, the 5%, wakes up 8 seconds later and says, wait a minute, is this a smart decision? Am I going to look foolish to my boss for buying the software? Am I going to look irresponsible to my spouse for buying this car?
The conscious mind needs an alibi.
An alibi. Yes, that is exactly what it is. Give the 95% the emotional feeling it craves, and give the 5% the statistics it needs so the customer doesn't feel foolish later.
Because nobody wants to feel stupid.
Never.
Yeah.
The features and the spreadsheets are there to provide the logical rationalization for the emotional decision. If you reverse the order, if you lead with the logic, or if you only provide the logic, the emotional decision never happens in the first place.
Right. The server farm never fires the aha pattern.
Exactly. And there is nothing for the monitor to justify.
This is a profound shift in how we structure our communication. We always want to lead with our strongest logical proof, our best case study, our most impressive metric.
It's our instinct.
But this science tells us that is entirely backward. You lead with the emotional hook, the subconscious trigger that speaks to safety, status, or identity, and you follow up with the logical proof to seal the deal and provide the alibi.
If we synthesize this entire chapter into one clear, memorable insight, the absolute soul of this text, it is this. The conscious mind is not the CEO of the customer's decision-making process. It is merely the PR agent.
Oh, that is good. Let's marinate on that for a second. The PR agent.
Think about a massive corporation. The CEO sits in a dark, quiet boardroom, the subconscious making all the real, heavy, survival-level decisions based on complex, emotional, and rapid calculations.
Doing the real work.
Right. Then the CEO hands the final decision out the door to the PR agent, the conscious mind, who stands at the podium under the bright lights.
And what does the PR agent do?
The PR agent's only job is to face the public and come up with a logical, socially acceptable, data-driven reason for why the CEO made that decision.
So when we use focus groups, we are literally just interviewing a room full of PR agents.
Exactly. And the PR agent will tell you whatever sounds good. They will spin the narrative. The CEO made this choice due to synergy and cost efficiency.
When really the CEO just liked the shiny red sports car.
Or the CEO was terrified of the competition. If you want to succeed in business, entrepreneurship, or any form of persuasion, you have to stop trying to negotiate with the PR agent using spreadsheets and feature lists.
Because they can't actually buy anything.
Right. The PR agent doesn't even have the authority to sign the check.
They're just a mouthpiece.
You must learn to bypass the PR agent at the podium and speak directly to the CEO in the boardroom, the 95% of the brain that operates on emotion, nonverbal cues, and subconscious desires.
That is the ultimate takeaway. You have to learn how to bypass the podium and talk to the CEO. Thank you for such a brilliant, deep breakdown of these foundational concepts.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
The science here is just undeniable, and the implications for how we communicate, how we market, and how we build products are massive. But it leaves us with a critical, almost daunting challenge.
It does.
If we now know that facts and statistics don't actually make the sale, and that 95% of the brain decides before the conscious mind even realizes it well, it raises a massive question for you to explore as you go about your day. What specific invisible triggers do you need to pull to make that subconscious CEO say yes?
That is the real work and the true art of neuromarketing.
How do you actually speak the language of that 95% when they don't respond to words and numbers? Well, that is exactly the secret we will uncover in our next deep dive.
Did you know that to your brain, seeing a high price tag feels exactly the same as getting physically pinched?
Yeah, the neurological response is, well, it's virtually indistinguishable.
Wait, really? Like literally the same?
Literally. If I put you in a brain scanner right now and, pinched your arm or showed you a $20 price tag for an apple, the exact same alarm bells would ring inside your head.
That is just, normally we think of spending money as a purely logical exercise, right?
Yes.
Like balancing a checkbook. You look at the price, you evaluate your budget, and you just make a calculated choice.
We like to think that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you're listening to this right now while drinking like a $7 latte, you probably feel like you made a completely rational decision at the register.
Oh, absolutely. We desperately want to believe we are rational actors operating in this purely mathematical marketplace. We really like to think of our brains as calculators.
But then, you look at the actual data. For this deep dive, we pulled a massive stack of neuroeconomics research.
That's a lot of material.
It really is. We've got fMRI studies from Stanford, the pioneering behavioral economics work of Dan O'Reilly, George Lowenstein, and Kathleen Vohs. And that illusion of mathematical logic just completely shatters.
Completely.
We're looking at a commercial landscape where spending money is a literal neurological pain, but incredibly, there are scientifically proven ways to cure it.
Yeah, today you're going to learn that pricing isn't a math problem. It is a profound psychological equation. We are going to explore how mastering the way the human brain perceives value, pain, and choices is the ultimate shortcut for anyone in business or entrepreneurship to maximize sales and customer satisfaction.
And the best part is,
You can do all this without ever having to change the actual product.
okay, let's unpack this, because if pricing is fundamentally a psychological equation, we need to understand the variables.
Right, the input.
Exactly. And to do that, we have to start by looking at what is physically happening inside the human brain at the exact moment a transaction takes place. Which brings us to some groundbreaking research from neuroeconomics, specifically the work of George Lowenstein from Carnegie Mellon University and his colleagues at Stanford.
This study is just incredible.
It really is. They essentially took human subjects, put them into fMRI scanners, which, by the way, are those massive machines that track blood flow in the brain in real time to see which areas are active.
Super loud, humming magnetic tubes.
Right, yeah. So they put them in there and they gave them cold, hard cash.
And the methodology here is vital to understand. So the subjects are lying on their backs inside this humming tube.
Sounds relaxing.
Oh, very. But they have a set amount of real money given to them by the researchers. And a screen above them flashes various products along with their prices.
Okay, so they're like shopping in an MRI.
Exactly. And some of the products were genuinely good deals. Others were just outrageously overpriced, deliberately designed to seem like a complete ripoff.
Right.
And the subjects had a simple choice, press a button to buy the item with their cash or keep the money.
And here's where it gets crazy. When the subjects were shown an item with a price tag that was just too high, something they perceived as totally unfair, it wasn't the logic or math centers of the prefrontal cortex that lit up.
Nope, not at all.
It was the insula,
Yes.
which, for those who don't know, is the pain center of the brain. It's the exact same region that triggers when you stub your toe or smell rotting food or even experience social rejection.
Yeah, it's an evolutionary alarm system.
Exactly. To your brain, an unfair price isn't just a bad deal, it is an evolutionary threat. It physically hurts.
And what's fascinating here is how predictive this biological response is.
Yeah.
After analyzing all this data, Professor Lowenstein noted that the researchers could look purely at the fMRI scans and predict whether the person was going to buy the item or not.
Without even asking them.
Without saying a word to them, they didn't need to ask. If the insula flared up, the wallet stayed shut, period.
Wow.
The decision was being made on a visceral biological level before any conscious rationalization even took place.
But hold on, I have to ask, why would the brain process an abstract concept like a printed number on a price tag as physical pain?
It's a great question.
I mean, humans invented money fairly recently in our evolutionary history, right? Our ancestors weren't out on the savannah comparing interest rates.
No, they definitely weren't.
So why is a financial transaction tripping an evolutionary alarm system designed to protect us from predators or physical injury?
Well, evolutionary psychologists argue that our brains process money not as abstract math, but as a survival resource.
Okay, like food.
Exactly like food. Think about it. In a hunter-gatherer environment, if you lose a significant portion of your winter food cache, that is a direct threat to your physical survival.
Right, you could literally starve.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the brain treats a bad financial deal as a sudden, unwarranted depletion of your survival resources. The insula sounds the alarm to make you pull away, exactly like it makes you pull your hand away from a hot stove.
So it's a protective mechanism.
100%. It's trying to keep you alive.
So, okay, if I go and buy a $2 drip coffee, does that hurt less than a $7 artisanal latte? Like, is the pain just tied to the absolute amount of money leaving my pocket?
Well, you might assume that, but actually no. The pain isn't strictly tied to the absolute dollar amount.
Really?
Yeah, the pain is entirely relative to the context and the perceived fairness of the transaction. If it were just about the raw dollar amount, nobody would ever buy a house or a car.
Because the pain would just be unbearable.
Exactly, your brain would explode.
Right. So to clarify, are you saying the brain doesn't care about the number of dollars? It only cares about whether it feels like it's getting cheated?
Precisely. Let's look at a classic study by the renowned behavioral economist Richard Thaler.
Oh, I love this one.
It's so good. So he asked people to imagine they're lying on a hot beach and they were just desperate for a cold beer.
Sweating, dying of thirst.
Exactly. And he asked them how much they would be willing to pay for one. In one scenario, a friend is going to fetch the beer from a fancy, upscale resort hotel at the end of the beach.
Okay, sounds nice.
In the other scenario, the friend is getting it from a rundown, dilapidated grocery store down the street.
And obviously it's the exact same brand of beer, right?
Yes.
Same size, same temperature. It's a sealed bottle.
Identical product in every single way. Yet, people were happily willing to pay nearly twice as much for the beer from the resort hotel than they were for the beer from the grocery store.
Wait, but if the insula fires up when our survival resources are depleted, shouldn't the higher price at the resort trigger more pain?
You'd think so, logically.
Right. A resort beer is objectively a worse deal for your wallet. It's literally taking more of your survival resources. Why does it hurt less?
Because the brain factors in expectation and fairness. We expect a resort to have massive overhead, beautiful ambiance, premium
So
service.
fancy waiters in white shirts?
Exactly.
Mm.
So paying $7 there feels fair. It feels justified by the environment. But we expect a rundown grocery store to be cheap. If the grocery store asks for $7, your brain instantly flags it as a predatory attack on your resources. It feels like a ripoff. So the pain isn't caused by the $7. It's caused by the violation of your expectations.
That completely reframes the entire concept of a transaction for me. It's all about managing the pain of paying.
Yes.
And this perfectly explains what I call the sushi chef problem.
Oh, the conveyor belts.
Yes. If you've ever been to one of those sushi restaurants where the food comes around on a little conveyor belt, the plates are all color-coded based on price.
Right, like a blue plate is $3, a red plate is $5, a gold plate is $8.
Exactly. And I know it's a very common, highly efficient setup for a restaurant.
Efficient for the restaurant, maybe?
Right, maybe. But I find those places incredibly stressful.
Really?
Yes, because every single time I reach for a plate, my brain is forced to evaluate a microtransaction. Okay, this yellowtail is $5. Is it fresh enough to warrant $5? Do I want this salmon for $3 instead?
You're doing math with every bite.
Yes. Every single bite has a price tag attached. You are forcing your brain's insula to evaluate fairness and potential resource loss dozens of times throughout what is supposed to be a relaxing meal.
Which is the absolute antithesis of an enjoyable customer experience, neurologically speaking.
It really is.
You are constantly interrupting the pleasure of consumption with the pain of purchasing. It's an exhausting cognitive load.
Now contrast that with, say, an all-inclusive cruise, or even just going to a high-end Brazilian steakhouse where you pay a flat fee.
Completely different dynamic.
Totally.
Yeah.
You might end up paying significantly more money overall for the flat fee experience than you would have spent a la carte at the sushi belt.
Yeah.
But you pay one flat rate at the door, you experience one single moment of purchasing pain, and then you just enjoy yourself.
Right.
There is zero pain during the actual consumption.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, businesses that master this dynamic are effectively removing the friction of the pain response.
Like subscriptions.
Exactly. Think about the revolution of the subscription model. Before streaming, if you rented movies at a video store,
The Blockbuster days.
right, every rental was a decision weighing cost versus entertainment. Do I really want to spend $4 on this old movie? It was a repeated moment of friction,
Oh,
plus the late fees.
the late fees were pure insula pain.
Exactly. So Netflix comes along and consolidates all of that into one flat monthly fee, automatically deducted, completely removing the purchase decision from the consumption experience.
And beyond subscriptions, there is another incredibly common tool that acts as a literal neurological painkiller in the modern economy.
Let me guess. The credit card.
Yes, the credit card.
The credit card is a masterpiece of behavioral psychology. I mean, handing over physical paper money triggers a visceral response.
because it's tangible.
Right. You have a physical representation of your labor and resources literally leaving your hands. The loss is immediate and tangible. You can feel your wallet getting thinner.
But swiping a piece of plastic or tapping your phone feels completely different.
Because it creates a psychological decoupling. A credit card transfers the financial pain to a vague, undefined point in the future, the end of the month when the bill arrives.
It's like future me's problem.
Exactly. It allows the consumer to experience the immediate gratification of the purchase, while the brain basically ignores the pain, because the biological threat isn't happening in the present moment. The brain really struggles to feel empathy for its future self.
It's the ultimate neuroanesthetic, which obviously carries massive dangers for personal debt.
Oh, massive.
But focusing purely on the takeaway for the listener today, if you are a business owner, a freelancer, or an entrepreneur, the golden rule here is minimum pain, maximum sales.
Yes. You have to audit your customer journey and eliminate friction. Avoid drip pricing.
Remind me what drip pricing is again.
That's where a customer buys a base product and then is constantly ambushed with additional fees at checkout.
Ugh, like airlines.
Exactly. Airlines are notorious for this. Baggage fees, seat selection fees, boarding fees. It makes people miserable because it triggers the insula repeatedly. It's the sushi chef problem in the sky.
Right. So instead, you should bundle. When a car dealership bundles leather seats, a sunroof, and an upgraded stereo into one luxury package for $3,000, they are doing you a neurological favor.
A huge favor.
If they priced every item individually, you'd agonizingly nitpick whether a sunroof is worth $800. By bundling, the customer can't easily evaluate the price of the individual components. The pain is consolidated into one single decision.
And whenever possible, offer credit, payment plans, or digital wallet integrations. You aren't tricking the consumer. You're simply removing the immediate visceral cash-paying friction that causes the brain to panic and stop a transaction.
But wait, if the actual act of spending money triggers an evolutionary pain response, what does merely looking at money do to us? Like if I'm just sitting in a room with a stack of cash on the table, I'm not losing resources, so my insula shouldn't fire. But does it change how I think?
This raises an important question about the psychological concept of priming.
Priming.
Right. Priming is the phenomenon where exposure to a subtle cue drastically alters your subsequent behavior or thoughts, without you ever being consciously aware of the influence. And money is arguably the most potent priming cue in human psychology.
This research is just so counterintuitive to me. There is a psychologist named Kathleen Vohs who has studied this extensively.
Her work is brilliant.
It really is. She set up experiments where people were exposed to incredibly subtle reminders of money. We aren't talking about handing them a briefcase full of cash.
Right, nothing obvious.
We are talking about having them unscramble sentences that happen to include financial words, or having them sit at a desk where a screensaver depicting floating currency was playing on a monitor in their peripheral vision.
And the subtlety is the entire point. If it's too obvious, the conscious mind intercepts it and rationalizes it. But when it's in the periphery, the conscious mind registers it as background noise and dismisses it.
But the subconscious absorbs it.
Completely. Vohs found that these money-primed subjects exhibited drastically different behavior compared to control groups who just sat in a room with a screensaver of fish swimming or unscrambled neutral words.
And the changes in behavior were entirely focused on self-sufficiency and, frankly, social isolation, right?
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
When the subjects were given an impossibly difficult puzzle to solve, the ones primed by the money cues took 70% longer to ask the researchers for help than the unprimed group.
70%.
They just doggedly wanted to do it themselves. They actively resisted relying on anyone else.
And it extended far beyond just asking for help. It fundamentally changed how they treated other humans.
This is the part that blew my mind.
In one variation, an actor who was secretly part of the experiment walked past the subject and pretended to accidentally drop a box of pencils.
Classic psych experiment setup.
Right. The money-primed subjects helped pick up significantly fewer pencils than the control group. In another test, they spent half as much time helping a peer who supposedly needed assistance with a data entry task.
They even found that when the subjects were told to set up 2 chairs in a room for a get-to-know-you conversation with another participant, the money-primed individuals physically placed the chairs further apart.
They literally desired more physical distance between themselves and another human being.
It's like the mere concept of money made them allergic to community.
To understand why this happens, we have to go back to the evolutionary and sociological function of money. Money, at its absolute core, is a tool of self-sufficiency.
Okay, debate time. Is this isolationist reaction an innate biological response, or is it just a cultural byproduct of modern capitalism?
That is a brilliant distinction.
Like, if you ran this experiment on someone from an uncontacted tribe who doesn't use currency, would a gold coin trigger the same behavior?
It is almost certainly a learned cultural adaptation, but one that is embedded so deeply in our societal software that it functions automatically, much like a biological reflex.
Got it.
Think about it. In a pre-currency tribal society, your survival depends entirely on your neighbors. You need empathy, reciprocal sharing, and community to build shelter, hunt, survive the winter.
You can't survive alone.
Exactly. But the invention of currency changes the survival math. With enough money, you don't need your neighbor's goodwill to build a barn. You can just hire a contractor.
Right.
Money replaces the need for social reliance with transactional independence. So when your subconscious is primed with images of money, it automatically shifts into a highly independent, self-focused, I don't need anybody frame of mind.
Which is a massive structural revelation for anyone in marketing or communication.
Okay.
If I'm running a charity, or say I work in the marketing department of a local food bank, the intuitive move is to put pictures of money on the brochure because I want people to give me money, right?
Right, that's what everyone does.
But based on this, should I stop showing pictures of coins and dollar bills in my donation campaigns? Does reminding people about the money I want them to donate actually ruin the empathetic response I need from them?
It absolutely ruins it. If your goal is to trigger empathy, community spirit, and a desire to sacrifice personal resources to help others, slapping a giant picture of a $100 bill on your direct mailer is catastrophic.
Because you're triggering the wrong mindset.
You are triggering that self-sufficient, every man for himself neural pathway. The person looking at the brochure subconsciously shifts into an independent mindset, which is the exact opposite of a charitable mindset.
Wow.
For campaigns focused on giving, nonprofits, or community building, you must strip financial imagery entirely from the creative. Focus heavily on human faces, community interaction, and emotional connection. Ask for their support, not their cash.
But on the flip side, if you are selling a product that appeals to that exact sense of selfish independence, money cues are your secret weapon.
Exactly.
If you are the wealth management firm selling aggressive investment accounts, or a luxury car dealership selling a two-seater sports car that screams, "I made it," you want to trigger that self-focused, status-driven mindset.
You absolutely do.
You should explicitly weave currency symbols, imagery of bank vaults, or visual metaphors for wealth into the periphery of your marketing.
Exactly. It is all about aligning the subconscious neural trigger with the conscious goal of your product.
Yeah.
You are steering the psychological state of the buyer to match the emotional promise of what you are selling.
So if seeing money makes us so independent and hyper-rational, as Fo's studies suggest, why do we completely lose our minds when we see a sale sign?
Good question.
It feels like those two biological responses are at war with each other. I mean, how does our brain actually know if a specific price is a good deal or not?
Well, it doesn't.
Right. The brain doesn't have an innate biological understanding of what a digital camera or a new mattress should cost.
You've hit on the central flaw of human cognition when it comes to commerce. The human brain does not possess an internal calculator for absolute value.
It just can't do it.
It is completely incapable of looking at an object in a vacuum, say a new model of a drone, and determining its intrinsic worth based on parts, labor, and utility. It requires a measuring stick. It only understands relative value.
Which brings us to one of the most powerful and heavily exploited forces in behavioral economics.
The anchoring effect.
The anchoring effect. We have to talk about Dan Ariely's work here because it genuinely makes me question my own free will.
It's humbling, for sure.
Anchoring is basically the idea that the first piece of numerical information our brain receives about a product acts as a heavy anchor, and every subsequent judgment is tethered to that initial number. The easiest way to conceptualize this is with gas prices. This is what economists call a drifting anchor.
Gasoline is the perfect everyday illustration of how flexible our perception of value is.
So, imagine you live in a town where gas has been $3 a gallon for 5 years. $3 is your solid historical anchor. One day, a geopolitical crisis hits, and it shoots up to $4.
Which hurts.
Every time you fill up your tank, your insula flares. It feels like highway robbery. It physically hurts because you are evaluating $4 against your $3 anchor. But then the price stays at $4 for a year. Over time, your brain pulls up the old anchor and drops a new one at $4. Now, $4 is the baseline for fairness.
And this is where the psychology gets exploitable.
Exactly. Because now, if the price jumps to $4.29, that feels painful. But if you see a gas station offering it for $3.99, a price that would have literally enraged you a year ago, you are suddenly thrilled.
You feel like you won the lottery.
You pull your car over immediately because you feel like you are beating the system. The absolute price is still incredibly high compared to history, but your relative anchor has shifted.
The gas price anchor makes a certain amount of logical sense, though, because even though it shifts, it's based on historical market data. Your brain is re-anchoring based on reality and repeated exposure.
Right, it's tethered to something real.
But Dan Ariely, being the brilliant provocateur that he is, wanted to know what happens when we don't have any historical data. What happens when we are asked to value a completely unfamiliar product? Can our brains be anchored by total, unrelated nonsense?
I read this study and I still almost refuse to believe it's true.
It's amazing.
Ariely ran an experiment where he brought MIT students into a room and held up an unfamiliar item like a fancy cordless computer keyboard, a design book, or a rare bottle of wine. He then asked the students to write down the last 2 digits of their social security number on a piece of paper.
A completely random, arbitrary number generated by a government bureaucracy that has absolutely nothing to do with economics, computer hardware, or French wine.
Right. So if your social security number ends in 14, you write down 14. If it ends in 89, you write down 89. Then he asked them a simple yes or no question. Would you pay this amount in dollars for this item? So would you pay $14 for this keyboard? Or would you pay $89?
Okay, so a simple yes or no.
After they answered yes or no, he asked them the critical question. What is the maximum amount you would be willing to pay for this item?
If humans are rational actors, the Social Security number should have zero impact on the final bid. The keyboard has a specific utility value to a student, regardless of their government ID.
But that's not what happened. The people with low social security numbers, like digits ending in 00 to 19, said they would pay, on average, about $16 for the cordless keyboard. But the people with high social security numbers, digits ending in 80 to 99, said they would pay an average of $56 for the exact same keyboard.
Just by forcing their conscious brain to process a high number right before evaluating the product, Ariely dropped a massive subconscious anchor.
From a social security number.
Exactly. Even though the subjects were fully aware that the number was just their social security digits, their brain desperately needed a baseline to evaluate this unknown keyboard. So it simply grabbed the nearest number in its short-term memory and used it as the starting point for valuation.
The correlation between the random digits and the final price was 0.52. I know a bit about psychological research, and a correlation of 0.52 for something that should have zero correlation is astonishingly high.
It's huge.
It implies that if you don't know what something should cost, I can literally walk up to you, shout a large number, and you will fundamentally change how much you're willing to pay for it.
It proves that the human brain's valuation system is incredibly fragile and highly susceptible to suggestion.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because once you understand anchoring, you stop seeing prices as objective realities and start seeing them as psychological traps everywhere you go. Infomercials are the absolute masters of this art form.
Oh, absolutely.
The host never just stands there and says, "This incredible blender costs $59. If they did, you'd think, $60 for a blender, that's kind of steep.
Because without an anchor, $59 feels like a significant outlay of resources.
Instead, they scream, department stores charge $200 for a machine with this much power. Boom. They just violently dropped a $200 anchor into your cognitive waters.
Your brain accepts $200 as the baseline value.
Then they say, but you won't pay $200. You won't even pay $100. Call in the next 10 minutes and it's yours for $59.99. By the time they reveal the real price, your insula is completely dormant.
Feels like an incredible steal.
Almost a rescue mission for your wallet. Because your brain is measuring the $59 against the artificial $200 anchor they planted.
Tech companies employ this exact same strategy, just with much better lighting and higher production value.
Yes, Apple is famous for this.
Look at the original iPhone launch. When Steve Jobs introduced the iPhone, it was a totally unprecedented product. Nobody knew what a touchscreen smartphone should cost. Jobs stood on stage and anchored the price at $599. He spent months establishing that as the definitive value for this revolutionary device.
And Early adopters paid it because it was a status symbol.
Yes, but the real genius happened months later. When Apple eventually dropped the price to $399, it caused an absolute frenzy of buying. They didn't just lower the price, they activated the anchor.
So people felt like they were saving 200 bucks.
Exactly. Consumers who were holding out suddenly felt like they were getting a massive discount. Apple capitalized on the early adopters willing to pay the high anchor and then made the product irresistibly attractive to the mass market by leveraging the contrast against that original anchor.
But anchoring isn't just about the sheer magnitude of the number, is it? It's also about the shape of the number, the texture of it.
The texture, yeah, that's a good way to put it.
This brings us to the work of marketing professors Chris Janisevsky and Dan Uwe. They looked at how our brains interpret precise prices versus round numbers.
This is an incredibly practical detail for anyone setting a price for a service, a house, or a B2B consulting contract.
Imagine you are buying a used car from a private seller, and they are asking for $5,000. It's a nice, clean, round number. Janisevsky and Uwe found that when we see a round number like 5,000, our brain subconsciously assumes it's an approximation.
We assume it's a soft number that the seller just pulled out of thin air.
Right. Because of that, if we are going to negotiate, we take big, sweeping chunks off. We might counteroffer at $4,000.
A round number implies a lack of underlying mathematical rigor. It signals to the buyer's brain that the value is fluid. But what happens if the seller asks for a highly specific number, like $4,988 or $5,012?
When the buyers in the studies saw those incredibly specific, precise numbers, their negotiation behavior completely changed. They didn't take huge chunks off the top. Instead of guessing the wholesale value was $1,000 lower, they only guessed it was maybe $50 or $100 lower. They might counter at $4,900.
The researchers brilliantly described this as creating a tighter mental measuring stick. A precise number implies that someone has actually done the math.
It feels calculated.
Right. It implies that the value is strictly calculated based on the cost of parts, hours of labor, and a specific profit margin. The buyer's brain respects a precise number much more than a round one because it feels authoritative and grounded in reality.
There was a fascinating real estate study from the University of Florida that backed this up perfectly in the real world. They looked at a massive data set of home sales and found that a house listed at exactly $500,000 routinely sold for significantly less than a house listed at $494,500.
It's so counterintuitive, but it works.
Think about that. The sellers who started with a lower but highly precise asking price actually walked away with more money at closing because buyers negotiated in much smaller, tighter increments.
The practical takeaway for you as a seller is twofold. First, be incredibly deliberate about where you drop your initial anchor. If you have a new, unfamiliar product, introduce it alongside a high anchor, maybe a premium tier or a competitor's price, to establish high perceived value.
And
Second, when you finally set your actual price, avoid dreaded round numbers at all costs. If you quote a web design project at $10,000, your client will intuitively try to knock you down to $8,000. If you quote it at $9,850, it implies a calculated, inflexible value, and they are far more likely to accept it without a fight.
Okay, so we've established that the brain uses external cues like historical anchors, random social security numbers, and precise digits to tell us what a deal is. We know price changes our perception of value,
Right.
but I want to push this to the absolute limit. Can a price tag actually change physical reality? Can the number on a printed receipt literally alter how a product tastes on your tongue or how a medication functions in your bloodstream?
It sounds like magical thinking. But the answer is definitively yes. We are moving beyond psychological perception and into the realm of biological sensation. The price of a product literally alters the brain's physical experience of consuming it. This is known as the placebo effect of pricing.
There is a legendary study on this by Baba Shiv, a researcher who partnered with teams at Stanford and Caltech. They took subjects, put them back inside the fMRI scanner, and hooked them up to a specialized tube that would deliver exact sips of wine directly into their mouths while their brains were being scanned.
It's an incredibly elaborate setup to measure the real-time neurology of pleasure.
Super elaborate. The researchers told the subjects they were going to taste various different wines and evaluate their quality. The screen inside the scanner would flash the price of the wine, the machine would deliver a sip, and the researchers would record the brain activity.
So they're sipping wine in a tube.
Exactly. For example, they told the subjects they were tasting a $5 bottle of table wine, and then a few minutes later, they told them they were tasting a $45 bottle of premium estate wine.
But of course, the researchers were lying.
Completely lying. It was the exact same cheap $5 Cabernet every single time. Every sip was physically identical.
The exact same wine.
But here is the staggering part. When the subjects thought they were drinking the $45 wine, the pleasure centers in their brain, specifically a region called the medial orbitofrontal cortex, which processes flavor, aroma, and reward, lit up significantly more than when they thought it was the $5 wine.
I want to emphasize a crucial distinction here because it's easy to misinterpret. The subjects were not lying on a post-tasting survey to look sophisticated.
They weren't just trying to impress the scientists.
No, not at all. Their brains were literally chemically experiencing more pleasure. The physical sensation of taste was enhanced purely by the expectation created by the high price tag.
It's like the price tag is a seasoning. The brain says this costs $45, therefore it must be excellent, and it preloads the sensory cortex to experience excellence. And it goes way beyond wine and food. Baba Shiv did another study with energy drinks to test cognitive performance.
Yes, the Sobe Adrenaline Rush study.
They gave one group an energy drink and charged them the full retail price of $1.89. They gave another group the exact same energy drink but told them they bought it in bulk and charged them a discounted price of 89 cents.
Okay.
Then they gave both groups a series of difficult word puzzles to solve. The group that paid full price for the energy drink actually solved the puzzles significantly faster.
That's unbelievable.
A higher price made the caffeine and sugar physically more stimulating to their cognitive functions. They literally got smarter because they paid more.
And in the medical realm, the data is even more shocking. Researchers conducted a study where they gave subjects a placebo pill, a sugar pill with absolutely zero active pharmaceutical ingredients, and told them it was a newly developed painkiller.
A fake pill.
A completely fake pill. They told half the group the pill was cheap, costing just 10 cents a dose. They told the other half it was a premium, cutting-edge medication costing $2.50 a dose. Afterwards, they administered a series of small, painful electric shocks to the subjects' wrists to test their pain tolerance.
Of the people who took the 10-cent pill, 61% reported a reduction in the pain of the shocks. But of the people who took the $2.50 pill, a massive 85% reported significant pain relief.
A high price tag literally acts as a biological painkiller.
The expectation of premium relief caused the brain to release its own endogenous opioids to numb the shock.
It's just wild.
But wait a minute, we have to address a massive contradiction here, because I feel like these two scientific realities are crashing into each other.
Let's hear it. Where's the contradiction?
In the very first segment, we talked about Lowenstein's fMRI study and the pain of paying. We established that seeing a high, unfair price tag literally causes the insula to feel physical pain, and it stops people from buying. It's a threat.
Right, the hot stove.
But now, with Baba Shiv's work, we are saying that a high price tag acts as a placebo that makes things taste better, makes you smarter, and relieves physical pain. If high prices cause literal pain, but high prices also make the product experience infinitely better, what on earth is a business supposed to do?
That's a great point.
Do I raise my prices to make my product better, or lower them so people will actually buy it? It feels like an impossible paradox.
What's fascinating here is how the brain separates these two events in time. It seems like a paradox, but it perfectly resolves itself when you understand the timeline of a transaction. The pain of paying happens at the point of purchase. It is the acute friction that occurs when you are deciding whether or not to part with your resources. But the pleasure boost or the placebo effect happens later, during the point of consumption.
So they are temporally separated. The pain and the pleasure aren't happening simultaneously.
Exactly. Imagine you are standing in a high-end wine shop looking at a $100 bottle of wine. Your insula flares.
Yeah.
You feel the pain of paying. You might decide the pain is too great and walk out.
Right.
But if you do overcome that pain, or better yet, if someone buys that bottle for you as a gift, eliminating your purchase pain entirely, when you finally take that bottle home, pull the cork and pour a glass, the pain of the transaction is in the past.
The insula is quiet.
Yes. Now, your brain's expectation of a $100 premium experience takes over, and the medial orbitofrontal cortex lights up, enhancing the flavor.
So the practical takeaway for the listener here is that you have to be incredibly, incredibly careful with discounts, especially on premium or luxury items.
Absolutely. Discounting is a double-edged sword. Slashing the price on a luxury item might help you overcome the customer's pain of paying in the short term. It might secure that immediate sale on a Tuesday afternoon.
Right, you get the quick conversion.
But you are playing a highly dangerous game with your brand equity.
Yeah.
Because you are literally degrading the customer's physical experience and satisfaction with the product during consumption.
Like if a premium clothing brand puts a massive 70% off sticker on a cashmere sweater, the consumer's brain immediately doubts its quality.
Subconsciously, yes.
When they wear it, they won't get that placebo boost of feeling luxurious. They might even think, is this defective? Did the company use cheaper wool this season? You've ruined the premium expectation. Price is a fundamental structural part of the luxury experience.
Yeah.
If you discount it, you aren't just changing the math. You are changing the biological reality of how the customer enjoys the product.
So let's look at the customer journey we've built so far. We've minimized the pain of paying by bundling. We've carefully set our precise price anchors to establish value. And we've maintained a premium price to guarantee a great placebo experience during consumption.
Sounds like the perfect business.
But what happens when you've done all of that perfectly? The customer is staring at your beautifully priced product lineup and they just freeze. What happens when they still can't decide which option to pick?
This is the paralyzing reality of choice architecture, and it requires us to look at how we can gently steer the customer using decoys and compromises.
I love this topic.
I have a perfect example of this from my own life, and it perfectly mirrors an anecdote in the book. A few months ago, I ran out of shaving gel. I went to the drugstore, walked down the personal care aisle, and I was standing there staring at literally dozens of cans of shaving cream.
The paradox of choice in action. The brain hates excessive variables.
It was terrible. There were regular gels, foaming creams, sensitive skin formulas, aloe vera infusions, cooling mint blasts, and they were all priced around the same, roughly $3 to $4, and all roughly the same size.
Sounds overwhelming.
My brain was completely locking up. The choices were too similar in value but different in features, and it felt like a massive cognitive chore to evaluate them. Then, tucked in the back of the shelf, I saw a can that said Advanced Formula.
And what made the advanced formula different?
It was a significantly taller can. It held about 20% more gel than all the other cans on the shelf. But here's the kicker. It was priced exactly the same as the smaller, regular cans.
Interesting. So what did you do?
I didn't even hesitate. My choice paralysis instantly evaporated. I didn't care what advanced formula actually meant. I didn't care about aloe versus mint anymore. I just grabbed the taller can, dug around to see if there was a second one hidden behind it, grabbed that one too, and marched to the register. It felt like an absolute victory over the drugstore.
And that feeling of victory, that sudden rush of clarity, is the exact mechanism of decoy marketing. In your scenario, the store likely just had leftover promotional stock of the large cans and carelessly tossed them on the shelf with the regular ones. But accidentally, they created a brilliant psychological trap. The regular-sized cans ceased to be viable options. They became decoys.
Wait, the regular ones were the decoys, but those were the main products.
Functionally, in that moment, they acted as decoys. Our brains struggle intensely to compare things that are fundamentally different, like trying to weigh the value of aloe vera against the value of a cooling mint sensation.
It's like comparing apples and oranges.
Exactly. It causes friction and irritation because there is no clear mathematical winner. But our brains are phenomenally good and incredibly fast at comparing things that are identical, except for one obvious quantifiable metric.
Size and price.
Right. When you saw the large can next to the identical small cans for the exact same price, your brain didn't have to work hard at all. The comparison was simple and binary. 20% more product for the exact same money equals a massive win. The presence of the small cans made the large can look like an undeniable, urgent bargain, speeding up your decision and making it feel highly rewarding.
Dan Ariely demonstrated this intentionally with a famous study involving subscriptions to The Economist magazine. He found an actual advertisement they were running on their website, and it offered 3 options for subscribers.
This is a classic.
Option 1 was a web-only subscription for $59. Option 2 was a print-only subscription for $125. Option 3 was a combo. You get both web and print, also for $125.
Take a second to really look at that middle option. Print only for $125 when you can get print and web for the exact same price of $125.
It seems like a glaring typo. Why would anyone ever, under any circumstances, buy the print only for $125 when they could get the combo for the exact same price? In Airley's study with his students, literally 0% of the subjects chose the print-only option. Nobody wanted it.
Right, so a rational, numbers-driven product manager would look at that sales data and say, this middle option is useless. It's generating zero sales, it's taking up screen real estate, and it's confusing. Delete it from the website to clean up the user experience.
But Airley wanted to know what would happen if they actually removed the useless option. So he tested a second group of people with only two choices: web for $59 or the combo for $125.
And the revenue results were drastically different.
Without that useless middle option, the majority of people suddenly chose the cheap $59 web option. The sales of the expensive $125 combo plummeted. By removing the decoy that nobody bought, predicted revenue for the magazine actually dropped by a massive 30%.
This perfectly illustrates the silent power of the decoy. The print-only option at $125 wasn't there to be sold. It was never meant to be sold. It was there purely as a cognitive measuring stick to make the combo option look like a spectacular deal.
It's all relative value again.
Exactly. When consumers only had to choose between web for $59 and combo for $125, it was a hard, frictionless choice. They had to ask themselves, do I really want to spend $66 extra just to get the physical magazine? But when the print only was sitting there at $125, the combo at $125 suddenly felt like they were getting the entire web subscription for free. The choice became effortless.
That is just brilliant. It bypasses the question of, do I need this, and replaces it with, look at what a great deal I'm getting. And it ties directly into a similar concept called the compromise effect. If the decoy is about making an identical price look better, the compromise effect is about making the middle path look safe.
Exactly. The compromise effect plays on our innate risk aversion. Let's look at the classic case study of Williams-Sonoma and the introduction of the home bread maker. When home bread makers first came to market, Williams-Sonoma introduced a model in their catalog for $275.
And consumers probably thought, $275, I can buy a lot of loaves of Wonder Bread for $275. Do I really need a dedicated machine taking up counter space just to bake bread?
Exactly. Sales were incredibly sluggish. People had no context for whether $275 was a good price for new technology or an extravagant luxury for wealthy people.
So they brought in a marketing consultancy, and the advice they received was deeply counterintuitive. The consultants didn't tell them to lower the price to $199. They didn't tell them to run a 20% off sale.
Nope.
Instead, they told Williams-Sonoma to introduce a second, much larger, commercial-grade bread maker and price it at over $400.
Which sounds crazy, right?
If I were an executive, I would assume everyone just laughed at the catalog. If they aren't buying the $275 one, why on earth would they buy a super expensive $400 behemoth that almost nobody would ever want in a standard home kitchen?
You would be right about the behemoth. The sales of the $400 machine were predictably terrible. They barely sold any. But the sales of the original $275 machine practically doubled overnight.
Because suddenly, $275 wasn't the most expensive option on the page anymore. It was no longer a crazy bleeding-edge luxury. It was the smart, sensible, middle-of-the-road compromise.
That is the essence of the compromise effect. Humans are biologically wired to be risk-averse, especially when navigating unknown terrain. We don't want to buy the cheapest option because we fear it's low quality and will break. But we don't want to buy the most expensive option because we fear we are overpaying, being extravagant, or getting ripped off.
We want the Goldilocks option.
Exactly. We naturally, instinctively gravitate toward the middle. It feels like the safest harbor. By adding an ultra-premium option to the top of the lineup, Williams-Sonoma completely reframed the original product. The $400 machine acted as a price anchor, making the $275 machine look like a wise, conservative choice.
So what does this all mean for the listener who is building a Shopify product page, or designing a restaurant menu, or drafting a 3-tier service proposal for a consulting client?
It means you must realize that you are the architect of your customers' choices. You shouldn't just present your best, most logical offerings in a vacuum. Choice architecture requires you to build deliberate contrast.
You have to guide them.
Right. If you have a target product that you really want to sell, say, a mid-tier software package, don't let it stand alone. Surround it. Introduce a strategically inferior decoy product at a similar price to make your target look like an undeniable bargain. Or, if you want to push sales of that mid-tier item, introduce an ultra-high-end premium product above it to make your main offering look like a smart, safe compromise.
But there has to be a limit to this, right? Because If I go to a restaurant and the menu have 30 decoys, 15 compromises, and 12 price anchors scattered across 8 pages, I don't feel guided. I feel exhausted and I just order a burger to make the pain stop.
Yes, absolutely. You must beware of choice fatigue, also known as the paradox of choice.
Yeah.
The brain loves an easy, binary comparison, like the shaving cream, but it completely shuts down when faced with a tidal wave of variables. If you present too many options, the cognitive load overcomes the desire to purchase, and the customer will abandon the transaction entirely.
They'll just walk away.
They really will. You have to find the sweet spot.
Yeah.
Carefully curated options that gently guide the buyer's psychology without overwhelming their cognitive capacity.
This has been an absolutely fascinating journey. We started with literal brain scans showing the physical evolutionary pain of a bad price. We explored how the mere sight of a dollar bill isolates us. We uncovered the magic of anchors and precise numbers.
We saw how price literally changes the taste of wine.
Yes, and we've ended up uncovering how to quietly pull the psychological strings of choice with decoys.
If we synthesize everything we've discussed today into one core overarching insight, it is this. Pricing is not an accounting function. It is not just a mathematical exercise about covering your costs and hitting a profit margin. Pricing is the ultimate communication tool.
It's a language.
It really is. The numbers, the packages, and the options you present are not speaking to the logical, calculating prefrontal cortex in your customer's mind. They are speaking directly to the oldest, most emotional, and most primitive parts of their brain. Your pricing architecture dictates everything from the physical pain they feel when opening their wallet to the literal biological taste of the food they consume.
If you take one thing away from this deep dive, think about the last major purchase you made. Really picture it. Was it a car, a new laptop, a vacation package? When you clicked buy, were you acting on pure mathematical logic? Or did a strategically placed decoy, a phantom anchor price, or a cleverly bundled package quietly guide your hand toward the checkout? It makes you wonder how much of our supposed free will as independent consumers is actually just the invisible hand of good neuromarketing.
It's a humbling thought for consumers, but an incredibly powerful toolkit for anyone in business once you understand the mechanics of how the brain actually works.
And we are just scratching the surface of how the brain interacts with the marketplace. Now that we've conquered the numbers, next time we'll dive into sensory brainfluence and uncover why the specific audio frequency of a potato chip crunching or the faint subconscious smell of a classroom in a retail store might just be the secret to unforgettable branding. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.
Imagine, just for a second, that you are about to eat a cup of fruit yogurt.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Right, and I want you to really visualize the entire process here, step by step, because the details, they matter immensely for what we're talking about today.
Step by step. Got it.
So you walk into your kitchen, right? You open the fridge, and you feel that, like, rush of cold air hits your face.
Oh, yeah, the best part on a hot day.
Exactly. And you see that little plastic container sitting on the shelf, and you pull it out. You're holding it in one hand, and with the other hand, you grasp the edge of that thin foil lid.
Right, the one that always seems perfectly sealed.
Yeah, and you pull it back, and you feel the tension of that adhesive giving way, with that subtle ripping sound. Then you take your spoon, insert it into the yogurt, and stir up all that fruit sitting at the bottom. You watch the colors kind of marble together.
Oh, yeah.
You bring the spoon up, you catch that sweet, tangy aroma, and finally, you take that very first taste. The cold, the texture, the flavor hitting your tongue.
Sounds pretty good right about now, actually.
Right. But here's the question. Out of all those distinct sensory steps, seeing the container, feeling the cold, peeling the foil, stirring it, smelling it, and tasting it, which of those moments do you think causes the absolute highest spike of excitement in the human brain?
Well, I mean, if you approach this logically, the answer seems completely obvious. It has to be the taste.
Right.
Or, perhaps the moment right before the taste when the aroma hits the olfactory receptors and the brain is anticipating the sugar.
That makes sense.
Because you are engaging in the act of consuming food to nourish your body.
Right.
Right. So the evolutionary reward, the flavor, and the calories, that should logically be the main neurological event.
And that is exactly what I assumed when I first looked at this. I mean, it's food. But there is a study from a neuromarketing firm called Neurofocus that just completely upends that logic.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They didn't just ask people what they like best, because people lie or just don't know. They actually hooked subjects up to EEG machines to measure the electrical activity in their brains in real time while they ate the yogurt.
Wow. Okay. So actual hard data.
Hard data. And the peak moment of brain engagement, like the absolute highest spike in neurological activity across the board for these people, had absolutely nothing to do with the taste.
Wait, really?
Nothing to do with the smell or the visual appeal of the fruit either. The most thrilling part of eating yogurt, according to your subconscious brain, is the physical, tactile act of grasping and peeling back that foil lid.
Wow, that is a fascinating revelation because it exposes this massive disconnect between what we think we value and what our brains actually respond to.
Cool.
We tell ourselves we are making these conscious, logical evaluations of the world based on the primary utility of an object. In this case, the flavor of the food.
Right. I buy yogurt because it tastes good.
Exactly. But the brain is actually capturing and prioritizing this whole symphony of secondary invisible cues.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Because discovering that my brain cares more about, like, aluminum foil than the actual food I'm eating, that shatters how I think about why I like the things I buy.
It really reframes everything.
It does. If our brains are peaking at the moment of opening the package, it means our daily experiences are being decoded on a level we aren't even consciously aware of.
Yeah, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, what we are really exploring in this deep dive is a concept known as sensory brainfluence.
Sensory brainfluence, okay.
Right. Our mission today is to decode how the human brain processes these invisible environmental cues, the ambient scents in a room, the background music in a store, the subtle tactile textures of a product package.
The stuff we usually ignore.
Exactly. The
Yeah.
background noise. And for anyone listening who is interested in business, entrepreneurship, or even just understanding the hidden architecture of their own daily choices, mastering these subconscious struggles is the ultimate shortcut.
Because it's happening anyway?
It's happening constantly. We are looking at how to connect deeply with people, how to make a product stand out in a ridiculously crowded market, and how to drive behavior without saying a single rational word.
I love that.
Because, as the research in our sources highlights, an estimated 95% of human decision-making happens entirely below the threshold of conscious awareness.
95%. I mean, just let that sink in. That figure completely reframes the entire concept of marketing.
It really does.
We spend so much time, energy, and money obsessing over the 5%.
Yeah.
We argue over the features, we optimize the price point, we draft these incredibly logical sales pages.
The spreadsheets.
Yes, the spreadsheets, completely ignoring the massive submerged portion of this psychological iceberg.
And that blind spot is exactly what Martin Lindstrom addresses in his extensive research, particularly in his book, Brand Sense.
Brand sense, right.
Lindstrom points out that modern commerce and marketing have become incredibly two-dimensional. Practically every brand out there relies almost exclusively on just two senses.
Sight and sound, I'm guessing.
You got it. Sight and sound, you see a flashy logo on a billboard, or you hear a catchy jingle on a streaming ad.
Right.
But Lindstrom argues that this two-dimensional approach is neurologically weak. Brands that figure out how to bridge the gap and appeal to all five senses, including touch, taste, and smell, they create a multisensory brand ecosystem.
An ecosystem.
Right, and that ecosystem forges an unbreakable subconscious bond with the consumer.
Which brings us to the gold standard Lindstrom points out in the source material. Singapore Airlines.
Oh, they are the absolute pinnacle of this.
I want to spend some time on this because it goes so far beyond having like a recognizable logo painted on the tail of an airplane. They have engineered an experience that feels less like a flight and more like an immersive theatrical production.
That is a very apt way to describe it. If you look at the historical context of airline branding, for decades it was purely about utility and visual recognition.
Red planes, blue planes.
Exactly. You had the colors of the airline, the shape of the planes, and maybe a catchy slogan about flying the friendly skies.
Right.
Singapore Airlines took a radically different approach. They certainly have the visual branding. I mean, the flight attendants wear incredibly distinct, fine silk uniforms that are meticulously color-coordinated with the cabin decor.
Which looks great, obviously.
It does. But way they separate themselves neurologically from almost every other airline in the world is their mastery of scent.
This is wild.
They use a patented, custom-designed fragrance called Stefan Floridian Waters.
A patented airline smell.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a level of commitment to the invisible environment that most companies wouldn't even consider.
Most wouldn't even know it's an option.
Right. So what does that actually look like in practice? How do they deploy a smell on an airplane?
Well, they weave it into the fabric of the entire journey. That specific patented scent is worn as a subtle perfume by the flight attendants.
Okay.
It is infused into the hot towels they hand you before takeoff. It is carefully circulated through the air filtration system in the cabin itself.
So you can't escape it,
Yeah.
but it's subtle.
Exactly, it's ambient. And what happens over time, especially for regular flyers, is a process of deep neurological associative learning.
Like Pavlov dogs.
Very similar mechanism. The brain unconsciously pairs that specific, pleasing aroma with the impeccable service, the comfortable visuals, and the overall premium experience of the flight.
Wow.
They have engineered a completely consistent sensory environment. The soft touch of the silk, the calming visual color palette, and the signature scent are all communicating the exact same message of luxury, care, and safety to the subconscious mind.
It makes me think of a perfectly directed movie. If you consider your absolute favorite film, the lighting, the musical score, the wardrobe, and the dialogue are all synchronized to make you feel a very specific emotion at a very specific time.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Right. Because if the soundtrack is playing a dissonant, terrifying horror chord, but the actors are smiling and laughing in a brightly lit room.
Your brain instantly gets confused.
Exactly. The inputs don't match. What Singapore Airlines has done is ensure that all their sensory actors are reading from the exact same script.
Yes, and the absence of sensory contradiction is vital here. When the senses contradict each other, the brain actually allocates cognitive resources to figure out why, which creates subtle stress or skepticism.
Like a spidey sense tingling.
Exactly. When the senses are aligned, the brain relaxes, and trust is built implicitly.
Okay,
So-
I follow the logic entirely, but I have to push back a little on the practicality of this.
Sure, go ahead.
Because if I'm listening to this right now and I run, say, a local accounting firm or a neighborhood hardware store,
Right.
or even just a freelance graphic design business from my home office, I don't have the multi-million-dollar budget of an international airline to go to a laboratory and invent a custom patented perfume.
Right, that would be absurd.
Right. So is this concept only applicable to massive luxury brands?
Not at all. That is a very, very common misconception, that sensory branding requires luxury budgets.
Okay, so how do I do it cheaply?
Well, the secret ingredient here isn't the financial cost of a patented chemical compound. It is the consistency of the sensory experience. You are aiming for a coherent environment, not necessarily an exclusive one.
Ah, coherence.
Yes. Let's look at a much more accessible example from the research. Barnes & Noble.
Oh, I love the smell of Barnes & Noble.
Exactly. When you walk into a Barnes & Noble bookstore, there is a very specific, highly consistent sensory profile. It is the smell of fresh, crisp paper and binding glue mingled with the warm, roasted aroma of Starbucks coffee wafting over from the in-store cafe.
Right. They didn't have to hire a chemist to invent the smell of a bookstore.
Exactly. They simply and reliably paired two naturally occurring, highly appealing scents that perfectly complement the visual and tactile experience of browsing physical books.
Because coffee and books just go together.
They naturally belong together in our cultural understanding of reading and relaxing. It creates this cozy intellectual environment, no lab required.
So if I'm applying this to my own life or business, I don't need to invent a scent, but I do need to conduct, like, a serious sensory audit.
A sensory audit. I like that phrasing.
Yeah. If I run a small physical shop, or even if I just have a designated background for my Zoom calls, I need to ask myself, what does this environment feel like, sound like, and smell like by default right now?
By default, yes. Because usually we just let it happen.
Right. If I'm a real estate agent showing a house, and I leave the windows closed and let it smell slightly musty while I talk about how fresh and modern the remodel is, I am creating that horror movie soundtrack contradiction.
Yes, you are.
The visual says new, but the smell says decay. I'm actively fighting against my own pitch because I let random environmental default settings dictate the client's subconscious experience.
That is the precise application. You must manage the unseen inputs. And if we want to understand why that musty smell would completely override the beautiful visual remodel of the house, we need to dive into the biology of scent itself. Because out of all the five senses, smell is uniquely wired to act as the ultimate invisible manipulator of human behavior.
This brings to mind the famous literary example of Marcel Proust and the Madeleine cake.
Oh, yes. The classic example.
Right. Proust wrote this incredibly vivid passage about taking a bite of a French Madeleine cake dipped in linden tea, and the sheer aroma and taste completely hijacked his brain.
It just pulled him back in time.
Exactly. He was overwhelmed by a sudden, intense rush of childhood memories. He wasn't trying to remember his youth. The sensory input just violently pulled the memory out of the archives. It's a phenomenon we now call involuntary memory.
And while Proust captured the poetry of it, The biological science backs it up entirely. Going all the way back to 1935, a researcher named Donald Laird conducted a foundational study.
1935. So we've known this for a while.
Oh, yes. He showed that 80% of men and 90% of women reported having vivid, emotionally charged memories triggered by specific odors.
That's almost everybody.
It is. And to understand why this happens, we have to look at the neuroanatomy of the brain, specifically how it evolved.
Let's get into the mechanics of that, because why would smell be more emotionally potent than sight? I mean, we rely on our eyes for almost everything.
It really comes down to routing, how the signals travel.
Go ahead.
When you see something, hear something, or touch something, that sensory data travels first to a region of the brain called the thalamus.
The thalamus.
Right. Think of the thalamus as the brain's central switchboard. Or, a highly analytical bouncer at a club.
Checking IDs.
Exactly. It receives the visual or auditory data, processes it logically, and then decides where to send it for further interpretation. There is a layer of rational filtering.
But smell operates entirely differently.
Completely different.
And bypasses the switchboard.
Completely bypasses it.
Yeah.
The olfactory bulb, which is the structure in the front of the brain that processes smell, has direct, unfiltered neural connections to the limbic system.
And the limbic system is...
It is essentially the emotional and behavioral control center of the brain. It houses the amygdala, which processes intense emotions like fear and pleasure, and the hippocampus, which is responsible for associative learning and the formation of long-term memories.
So from an evolutionary standpoint, why did early humans need smell to have this VIP all-access pass straight to the emotional center, bypassing logic entirely?
Survival. Plain and simple.
How so?
Well, if an early hominid smelled the scent of a predator, or the smoke of a fast-moving wildfire, or the putrid odor of rotting food, they didn't have time for the thalamus to logically analyze the situation.
Right. I wonder what type of wood is burning over there.
Exactly. They would be dead. They didn't need to ponder it. They needed an instant, visceral spike of fear and adrenaline to trigger the fight-or-flight response immediately. Smell is wired for instant, unthinking reaction.
Which means today, in a modern, safe environment, before your conscious brain even registers that you are smelling something pleasant, your emotional and memory centers are already reacting to it. You are literally feeling something before you are thinking something.
Precisely. And that neuroanatomical quirk sets up the foundation for some of the most startling experiments detailed in the source material. It explains how our rational evaluations of a product can be completely hijacked.
Which perfectly sets up the Nike shoe study.
Oh, this is a great one.
When I was going through the notes on this, I had to read the results twice because I didn't believe it.
It's hard to believe.
So researchers took two absolutely identical pairs of Nike running shoes. Same model, same size, same color, everything.
Literally the same shoe.
They put them in two separate identical rooms. One room had normal, unscented air. The other room was lightly infused with a mixed floral scent.
Just a subtle smell of flowers?
Right. They had consumers go in, examine the shoes, pick them up, look at the soles, and evaluate their quality.
And what happened?
A staggering 84% of the consumers evaluated the sneakers in the floral-scented room as superior products. 84%.
It is a massive statistical anomaly for two identical physical objects.
It is. And what I found most compelling about this data is the sheer lack of logic. If we were talking about a study on perfume or laundry detergent, a floral scent makes perfect sense.
Sure, it matches the product category.
But these are athletic running shoes. Logically, flowers and sweaty athletic gear do not mix. There is no rational, functional connection between a bouquet of flowers and a 5-mile run. So why does the brain make that leap?
It is driven by a cognitive bias known as the halo effect, supercharged by that limbic system we just talked about.
The halo effect. Break that down.
So when the consumer walks into the scented room, the olfactory bulb detects the subtle floral scent. It instantly pings the amygdala, generating a mild subconscious feeling of pleasure and well-being.
Okay, they just feel good in the room.
Right. Now, simultaneously, the consumer is holding and looking at the running shoe. Because the brain is experiencing a positive emotion while visually focusing on the shoe, it subconsciously misattributes the source of the good feeling.
Oh, man. It's like putting a warm golden hour Instagram filter over reality.
That is a perfect way to describe it.
The running shoe didn't change its physical properties. The stitching is exactly the same, but the brain's emotional lighting makes it look flawless.
That is an excellent analogy. The brain essentially concludes, I feel good right now, and I'm looking at this shoe, therefore this must be an exceptionally well-made shoe.
Even though that makes no sense.
Right, the rational mind, the part of the brain that knows flowers have nothing to do with running, is completely left out of the equation. The evaluation is made emotionally, and then the conscious mind simply invents a logical reason to justify it.
Like, oh, the rubber feels sturdier on this one.
Exactly. They convince themselves they're seeing better craftsmanship.
It makes me realize how fragile our own sense of objective judgment is. We think we're evaluating the stitching, but we're actually evaluating the air in the room.
It's a humbling thought.
And the science gets even wilder when we look at how our brains detect scents that we don't even consciously realize are present. I hit a complete wall when I read about the erotic t-shirt study.
Ah, yes. The subconscious detection.
The researchers had women smell shirts worn by aroused men. Consciously, the women said they smelled nothing, yet their brain scans showed massive activity. Are you telling me their brains were reacting to chemical signals that their conscious minds were entirely oblivious to?
Yes. It is a remarkable demonstration of the sheer processing power of the subconscious.
Walk me through the setup of this.
It was quite rigorous. Researchers had male subjects watch either a neutral documentary-style movie or a highly arousing erotic movie.
Okay.
They collected the t-shirts those men were wearing, capturing their sweat. They then asked female subjects to smell the different shirts.
And what did the women say?
When surveyed, virtually all the women reported that they didn't detect any difference at all. They smelled no distinct body odor, no cologne, nothing recognizable.
But the researchers weren't just relying on clipboards and questionnaires, right? They were monitoring the women using fMRI scans.
Yes, functional magnetic resonance imaging. They were watching the blood flow in the brain in real time.
And what did the scans show?
The fMRI scans revealed a completely different narrative than the verbal surveys. When the women sniffed the shirts worn by the men who had been watching the erotic film, specific areas of their brains lit up significantly, areas associated with arousal and emotion.
How is that chemically possible if they couldn't smell sweat? I mean,
Yeah.
how does a smell get past your nose without you knowing it?
Well, humans have two types of sweat glands. We have acrine glands, which produce the watery sweat that cools us down.
Like when you work out?
Exactly. And then we have apocrine glands, which secrete a thicker fluid that contains pheromones and chemical signals related to stress, fear, and sexual arousal.
Okay.
The subconscious olfactory system was detecting those subtle pheromonal markers. The brain was receiving and processing the chemical signal of male arousal, even though the concentration was so low that the conscious threshold-level sensory system didn't register an odor.
That feels like a massive red flag for anyone who relies on traditional market research.
Oh, it absolutely is.
Because if I'm launching a product and I run a focus group and I ask a customer, hey, how does this packaging make you feel? This study proves that their answer might be entirely disconnected from what their brain is actually experiencing.
They aren't lying to you, they just honestly don't know.
Right. They will give me a conscious, rationalized answer, but their neurochemistry might be doing the exact opposite.
That is the core limitation of self-reported data. People cannot tell you how a subconscious trigger affects them because, by definition, they are not conscious of it. This is why neuromarketing, using biometrics to measure actual physiological responses, has become so vital.
And when companies take this profound biological power of scent and scale it up into retail environments, the behavioral shifts are staggering.
They really are.
The sources detailed a study in a nightclub that decided to pump in specific scents: orange, peppermint, and seawater.
Interesting combo.
Right. They didn't change the music, they didn't change the lighting or the drinks, but the patrons actually danced significantly longer on the scented nights.
Just from the smell in the air.
Just the smell. And when they were surveyed as they left, they claimed the music was actually better than on the unscented nights. The smell literally altered their auditory perception.
The halo effect in action once again. The pleasant environmental scent elevated their mood, and they misattributed that elevated mood to the DJ's performance.
We see the same mechanism in the casino experiment, too. Researchers introduced a pleasant, ambient scent to a specific area of slot machines.
And casinos already have crazy sensory environments.
Exactly. They tracked the revenue, and that specific scented area saw a 45% jump in money played.
Wow.
A 45% increase in gambling behavior, driven entirely by an invisible smell in the air.
It's powerful stuff.
Then you look at clothing retailers like Tom's Pink, who use the crisp scent of line-dried linen in their stores to subconsciously emphasize the quality of their cotton shirts.
That's a great alignment.
Or the grocery store in Brooklyn that installed scent machines to strategically pump the smell of chocolate into the candy aisle, and then the sharp, fresh scent of grapefruit into the produce section to stimulate salivary glands and drive impulse buying.
It is environmental engineering at its most covert and effective.
Totally.
But if someone is listening to this and planning to immediately buy a fleet of scent diffusers for their business, we need to introduce a massive caveat here.
Hit me.
The rule of thumb in sensory branding is own your smell. But you must absolutely remember that context is the supreme governing law.
Right. It's not just about finding a smell people like. It's about finding a smell that makes sense. Which leads us to the bus shelter disaster.
Oh, yeah.
This is the perfect cautionary tale.
It truly is. So an advertising agency was running a campaign to promote milk consumption.
Okay, classic got milk kind of stuff.
Oh, right. They decided to utilize scent marketing by placing ads in outdoor bus shelters across a major city. They equipped these shelters with specialized devices that periodically pumped out the rich, warm aroma of fresh-baked chocolate chip cookies.
I mean, on paper, in a boardroom, that probably sounded like the most brilliant idea ever pitched. Everyone loves the smell of chocolate chip cookies. It universally triggers positive childhood memories, and it is the single most logical pair for a glass of milk.
The underlying logic was completely sound, but the environmental context was completely ignored. In reality, the campaign was a catastrophic failure.
How fast did it fail?
It barely lasted a day before city authorities stepped in and forced the agency to dismantle the scent machines.
Because what works in a kitchen doesn't work on a sidewalk.
Exactly. The human brain is a highly contextual pattern recognition engine. If you smell warm chocolate chip cookies while walking into a bakery or standing in your grandmother's kitchen, your brain processes that sensory input as real, appropriate, and safe.
It triggers the desired craving.
Right. But if you are standing in a gritty, outdoor urban bus shelter, surrounded by the smell of diesel exhaust, hot asphalt, and city trash, and you are suddenly hit with the overpowering scent of fresh bakery cookies, your brain instantly flags it as an anomaly.
It feels invasive. The brain knows there is no oven there.
Precisely. The limbic system recognizes that the smell is artificial, out of place, and therefore potentially suspicious.
Wow.
Instead of triggering a cozy craving for milk, it triggered unease. It led to a massive wave of complaints from citizens who found it intrusive, and particularly from the environmental illness community who are sensitive to artificial chemical fragrances.
So the takeaway here is that when you are engineering the scent of your business or your brand, it cannot be an arbitrary pleasantry.
No, not at all.
It must organically and logically match the context of the environment and the product you are offering.
Perfectly said.
So if I'm running like a high-end auto detailing shop, pumping in the smell of lavender and vanilla might relax people, but it contradicts the context.
Yes.
I should be highlighting the smell of premium leather polish or clean citrus degreaser. The scent has to validate the visual promise.
It has to tell the same story.
Right. Now, if we take this a step further, smell doesn't just change how we perceive things in the present moment, like the nightclub music or the running shoes. The source material outlines how it acts as a permanent etching tool for the brain.
This is where it gets really powerful.
We can actually hack human memory using scent. I want to talk about John Medina's experiment because this bridges the gap between marketing and education.
John Medina is a developmental molecular biologist, and he is deeply interested in how the brain encodes and retrieves information.
Okay.
He wanted to test the associative power of scent and memory on his own students in a highly controlled academic setting.
So before teaching a highly complex, dense lesson on molecular biology, he took a bottle of Brut cologne. Just your standard, strong, unmistakable drugstore men's cologne.
You can picture the green bottle.
Yep. And he sprayed it on the wall of the classroom.
And it is worth noting that Brut cologne has absolutely no logical, thematic, or academic connection to the study of molecular biology.
None whatsoever. But he proceeded to teach the complex material while that specific aroma filled the air. Fast forward to the end of the semester, and it was time for the final exam.
The big test.
Right. And right before the students took the test, Medina secretly sprayed the Brut cologne in the room again.
And the results were undeniable.
What happened?
The students who had originally learned the material while smelling the cologne performed significantly better on their final exam than the control group who learned and tested in an unscented room.
That is incredible. Why did that happen?
What Medina demonstrated was the mechanical power of a retrieval cue. When the students first learned the biology concepts, their hippocampuses were simultaneously recording the presence of the brute cologne.
They got wired together.
Exactly. The academic data and the olfactory data were bundled together into the same neural pathway. Months later, when the scent was reintroduced during the exam, it acted as a physical key. It unlocked that specific neural pathway and literally yanked the complex biology information out of their long-term memory banks, making it easier to access.
That is wild. And we even see this concept weaponized, for a lack of a better term, in the political arena.
Oh, yes. The sources detail a fascinating example of this.
They mentioned a South Korean politician who understood this mechanism perfectly. He commissioned a custom scent, which he boldly named Great Korea.
A very literal name.
Right. And he had his staff spray this specific fragrance heavily at all his campaign rallies, town halls, and speeches. His strategy was to then spray that identical scent near the polling places on Election Day.
And looking at that purely from the standpoint of neurological mechanics, it is a highly effective, theoretically sound tactic.
He wasn't taking a stance on the politics, just the biology.
Exactly. He was using the exact same associative learning principles as John Medina. He wanted the scent to act as a retrieval cue, so that when voters had the ballot in their hands and smelled the air, their brains would subconsciously retrieve the emotional high of his campaign speeches.
So if I'm a business owner, and I want to use this mechanism to make my product, my unboxing experience, or my retail store unforgettable.
Yeah.
How do I choose the right scent? Because the research points out that you can't just pick any nice smell. You need a very specific strategy.
Yes. The research indicates that for maximum memory retention, you must use uncommon odors.
Uncommon odors. Why?
Well, this was beautifully illustrated in what is known as the pencil study.
Break down the methodology on that one.
Researchers gathered subjects and had them physically handle and evaluate 3 different types of unbranded pencils. The first group evaluated standard unscented pencils to serve as the baseline control.
Makes sense.
The second group evaluated pencils that had been infused with the scent of pine. Now, pine is a very common, highly familiar smell to most people.
Cleaners, trees, air fresheners.
Exactly. The third group evaluated pencils that were scented with tea tree oil. Tea tree oil has a much more distinct, medicinal, and relatively uncommon aromatic profile for the average consumer.
Okay, so then they tested them later to see which pencil they remembered best.
Exactly. After a period of time, they tested the subject's recall of the specific products. The unscented pencils were largely forgotten. The pine-scented pencils had slightly better recall. But the pencils scented with the uncommon tea tree oil produced vastly superior, durable, and long-lasting memories.
Wow.
The subjects remembered the details of the tea tree pencils far more accurately than the others.
The way I picture this mechanism in my head is to think of the human brain as a massive, constantly expanding, slightly disorganized filing cabinet.
I like that.
If I decide to scent my new product with pine or vanilla or lemon scents that people encounter dozens of times a day in cleaning products, candles, and foods, I am basically taking a single piece of paper and shoving it into an already overflowing file folder labeled pine.
It's going to get lost.
My product is going to get completely lost in a sea of thousands of other pre-existing memories associated with that common smell.
That is a very accurate way to visualize it. You are suffering from associative interference.
Associative interference?
Right.
But if I use an uncommon scent, like tea tree oil or leather and tobacco or a custom blend, I'm creating a brand new, completely empty file folder in the user's brain.
Yes. You own that folder.
My product is the very first and only piece of paper in there.
Yeah.
So months later, when they encounter that scent again, the brain only have one memory to pull up my brand. We saw this in the bar study too, right?
Yes.
A bar pumped in the specific, unique aroma of a particular liquor brand while showing a visual ad for that liquor on the screens, and sales for that specific drink doubled compared to just showing the visual ad alone.
Yes, and from a high-level business strategy perspective, utilizing an uncommon scent offers a massive defensible first-mover advantage.
How so? Like legally?
Yes. In the United States and in several other jurisdictions, specific scents can actually be legally trademarked if they serve as a distinct brand identifier and not just a functional aspect of the product.
You can own a smell in the eyes of the law.
If you are the first entrepreneur to attach a highly unique, uncommon scent to a specific category of product, you don't just gain real estate in your customer's memory. You gain legal protection over that sensory real estate. You legally prevent your competitors from ever using that scent to trigger the associative memory you built.
Okay, so we've established that we can hack emotion and memory using smell.
Mm.
But what about a sense that seems purely objective, like taste?
Ah, taste.
I think most of us assume taste is an absolute chemical reality. Sugar molecules are sweet, salt molecules are salty, acids are sour. It feels like a rigid science.
It feels that way, yes.
But the sources reveal a phenomenon that we can call the context illusion. The human brain is fundamentally incapable of separating a product from the environment in which it is consumed.
They are completely intertwined.
The sensory environment literally alters the chemical perception of taste.
Yeah.
And nobody learned this lesson the hard way, quite like Starbucks.
The Starbucks example is a brilliant cautionary tale about the fragility of sensory ecosystems.
Set the scene for us.
Starbucks built its global empire not just on caffeine, but on the rich, enveloping sensory experience of the coffee house. Specifically, the deep, roasted aroma of freshly ground coffee beans.
Iconic.
That smell was their primary environmental asset. However, several years ago, corporate leadership wanted to boost their food sales and capture the morning commuter market more effectively.
Which makes business sense.
So they introduced a line of hot, egg-based breakfast sandwiches.
And from a purely spreadsheet-driven business logic standpoint, it is a flawless idea. People drink coffee in the morning, people eat eggs in the morning, put them together to increase the average transaction value.
The math checks out.
But from a sensory standpoint, it was a slow-moving catastrophe.
Because of the chemistry of the ingredients. Eggs, especially when heated, release sulfur compounds. They smell like eggs.
Right, and when thousands of Starbucks locations started heating these sandwiches in their relatively small stores,
Yeah.
the heavy, savory smell of the eggs completely overpowered the delicate, nuanced aroma of the coffee.
It clashed horribly.
It fundamentally ruined the precise sensory appeal that Starbucks was famous for.
And here is where the context illusion takes hold. It wasn't just that the stores smelled bad. Customers actually began complaining that the coffee tasted worse.
Wait, they thought the coffee changed.
Yes. The beans hadn't changed, the brewing process hadn't changed, the water temperature was exactly the same. But because flavor is a neurological construct heavily dependent on olfaction, when you chew or swallow, aromas are forced up the retronasal passage into the olfactory bulb. The corrupted ambient environment fundamentally altered the perception of the beverage.
The coffee tasted inferior because the room smelled like sulfur.
Exactly.
It was such a severe threat to their core brand that they had to completely pull the sandwiches from the menu, absorbing a massive loss in potential revenue until they could re-engineer the food and the preparation methods to ensure they didn't emit that overpowering egg smell.
It proves you can have the highest quality coffee beans in the world, roasted to perfection, but if the room smells wrong, the coffee tastes wrong.
The environment overrides the product.
It really does.
But the absolute deepest dive into this context illusion is the dilemma faced by Nespresso. When I read this case study, it completely changed how I view product design.
Nespresso is a fascinating study in overcoming sensory deficits. They manufacture high-end, pod-based espresso machines for home use.
Right.
From a purely objective chemical standpoint, the extraction pressure, the water temperature, and the quality of the coffee in the pods produced an espresso that was virtually identical in quality to what you would be handed by a trained barista in a premium coffee shop.
But the consumers rejected that reality. They absolutely refused to believe it.
I did.
In blind taste tests and surveys, consumers consistently rated the Nespresso home coffee as significantly inferior to coffee shop coffee.
And this is where the neuromarketing research gets incredibly granular. Studies into the perception of coffee revealed that a staggering 60% of the sensory experience of drinking an espresso comes entirely from the retail environment itself.
60%.
60%.
Let's break down what that 60% actually consists of, because it's obviously not the liquid in the cup.
It is the sensory theater.
The theater, okay.
It is the loud, mechanical hissing sound of the commercial espresso machine steaming the milk. It is the heavy, tactile weight of the ceramic cup on the saucer. It is the ambient chatter of the cafe, the indie music playing softly over the speakers.
The smell of the beans.
The intense, concentrated smell of roasting beans filling the large room, the visual aesthetic of the rustic wood tables and the barista's apron. All of those peripheral inputs are gathered by the brain and synthesized into the final perception of flavor.
And this is called source bias, right?
Yes, source bias. The brain actively discounts the quality of the homebrewed coffee simply because it lacks the surrounding sensory theater of the cafe. It assumes that because the environment is mundane, the product must be mundane.
This presents a massive, almost impossible challenge. If I'm an entrepreneur and I have spent years developing a premium product that is explicitly designed to be used by a consumer in their quiet, mundane kitchen at home. How on earth do I overcome a 60% sensory deficit?
It's a huge hurdle.
I can't ship a barista to their house. I can't force them to play indie music while they push the button on the machine. How do you solve a problem that exists outside the physical boundaries of your product?
Well, you cannot fix the customer's home environment. Nespresso realized that was a losing battle.
What do they do?
Their brilliant solution was to fix the brain's baseline perception of the brand itself. Nespresso launched a global chain of incredibly high-end, branded luxury retail boutiques. They opened these massive, beautifully designed stores in prime real estate locations around the world.
But they weren't pivoting to become a cafe competitor to Starbucks, right? That wasn't the goal.
No, not at all. The boutiques were essentially massive sensory conditioning labs.
Wow. Conditioning labs?
They built these stores entirely to establish a premium sensory bits line in the consumer's mind. They wanted the consumer to walk in, experience the stunning visual design, hear the sophisticated sounds, smell the pure espresso, and interact with highly trained staff.
And then what?
Once that intense premium association was locked into the consumer's limbic system, a psychological bridge was built. That perception successfully transferred to the home product.
So when they went home?
When the customer later bought the pods, took them home, and drank Nespresso in their quiet kitchen, their brain recalled the luxury of the boutique. The memory of the environment augmented the present reality, and suddenly, the home coffee tasted significantly better.
That is next-level psychological marketing.
Yeah.
They use a physical retail space not just to sell a product, but to reprogram how the brain experiences the product in a completely different location.
It is brilliant.
So if I'm looking for a way to apply this to my own work, I have to look closely at the context illusion.
Mm-hmm.
I need to evaluate exactly where and how my product or service is actually being consumed.
Yes.
If I realize that the end user's environment is robbing my product of its full potential, if I'm suffering from source bias, I might have to engineer a way to elevate their memory of the brand, perhaps through an incredible unboxing experience or a highly polished digital interface to compensate for the mundane physical environment where they use it.
Exactly. You must manage the context, either physically or psychologically. And while we have focused heavily on scent and the context of taste, we cannot ignore the sheer behavioral power of the auditory environment.
Sound.
Yes. Audio cues bypass our rational filters just as effectively as smell, directly altering our behavior, our pacing, and our purchasing choices without us ever realizing it.
This brings us to the soundtrack of choice. I want to dissect the famous UK wine shop experiment because this is one of the most elegant, undeniable proofs of subconscious influence I've ever encountered in behavioral economics.
The methodology of the UK wine shop study is brilliant in its simplicity. Researchers went into a standard supermarket and focused entirely on the wine aisle. They set up a display featuring French wines on one side and German wines on the other. They controlled for variables. The wines were roughly the same price point, the same level of sweetness, and similar overall quality.
So it's an even playing field.
Completely even. The only variable the researchers manipulated was the ambient background music playing softly from a speaker hidden in that specific aisle.
And what did they play?
On alternating days, they played either traditional, recognizable French accordion music or traditional German brass band music.
The results weren't just a minor statistical bump. They were immediate and drastic.
Very drastic.
On the days the French music played, the French wine drastically outsold the German wine by a massive margin. On the days the German music played, the exact reverse happened. The German wine flew off the shelves while the French wine sat there.
It was a clear correlation.
The music literally dictated the purchasing behavior of the room.
Yeah.
But the most crucial, revealing part of this study is what happened when the customers left the aisle.
Yes, the exit interviews are where the true psychology is revealed. Researchers stopped the shoppers after they had checked out and asked them a very simple question. Why did you choose the French wine today? Or why did you buy the German wine?
And the shoppers gave all sorts of highly rational, logical answers.
Of course they did.
They said things like, oh, I'm making a specific poultry dish tonight that pairs really well with the German Riesling. Or, I just prefer the terroir of French grapes. They invented these complex, logical narratives to explain their choice.
And when they were asked about the music,
When the researchers explicitly asked them, did the background music influence your choice today? The vast majority of shoppers denied it entirely. Some didn't even consciously remember hearing the music.
This exposes the fundamental nature of the human brain as a rationalization engine.
Hmm,
We are not inherently rational creatures, we are rationalizing creatures.
that's a great distinction.
The auditory cue of the French music triggered a subconscious association with France, which elevated the perceived appeal of the French wine in that moment. The decision was made emotionally and associatively.
And then the logic steps in later.
Then, milliseconds later, the conscious brain stepped in, looked at the bottle in its hand, and invented a logical alibi to protect its own sense of autonomy. We want to believe we are in control, so we construct a story to hide the fact that an accordion made us buy a specific bottle of alcohol.
It goes right back to the movie score analogy we discussed earlier. When you watch a film, the musical score subconsciously tells you how to feel before the actor even speaks a single line of dialogue.
Exactly.
If the violins swell with a major chord, your brain prepares for a romantic or triumphant moment. If the cellos drop into a low, fast, dissonant tempo, your heart rate actually increases and you feel anxious.
It's physiological.
The UK wine shop used music to literally score the shopper's experience, pushing their narrative and their behavior in a specific direction. And we see this application everywhere in the source material.
We do. For instance, studies have shown that children with behavioral problems learn math significantly faster and with less agitation when calming music was played in the background of the classroom.
Wow.
The auditory environment regulated their nervous systems, allowing cognitive function to improve. Or consider the study of a bank that decided to stop playing top 40 radio and instead played classical music in the lobby.
What did that do?
That single auditory change caused a 233% jump in the number of customers who reported perceiving the bank as inspiring.
Which is wild, because who walks into a retail bank branch to deposit a check and feels inspired?
Nobody. It was entirely the music augmenting their perception of the brand's stability and prestige.
This is the modern evolution of audio branding. Decades ago, a company like Muzak built an empire, providing what we derisively called elevator music. Bland, inoffensive, synthesized instrumental covers designed merely to fill dead air and prevent awkward silences. But today, it has evolved into a highly specialized field known as audio architecture. Companies are no longer just filling silence. They are custom crafting soundtracks to perfectly complement and enhance their visual and tactile branding.
The sources highlight a great example of this, Joie de Vivre's Hotel Vital in San Francisco.
Yeah.
They don't just put on a generic pop playlist in the lobby.
No, they recognize that the lobby is the first chapter of the sensory story. They use a custom-curated mix of serene, natural instrumentals that perfectly aligns with their visual focus on natural luxury, wellness, and relaxation.
It's all connected.
The audio tells the exact same story as the bamboo decor, the natural light, and the spa services. It is a cohesive sensory ecosystem.
So the realization here is that silence, or worse, accidental noise, is actively costing you connection and sales.
Totally.
If you have a physical space or a YouTube video or a podcast, you must find specific background music or create audio branding that aligns with the exact behavior you want to encourage.
It's an active tool.
Yes. If a retailer is selling streetwear apparel to teenagers, booming, high BPM hip-hop isn't just background noise. It's a physiological driver that increases heart rate, increases lingering time, and drives impulse purchasing.
And conversely,
If you run an organic day spa, playing generic radio is actively fighting against the relaxation your massage therapists are trying to provide. You need new age instrumentals that literally lower the heart rate of the clients, making them more receptive to upselling a service. The music isn't just art. It is an active, invisible employee.
if we synthesize all of these distinct elements, the sight, the sound, the smell, the taste, the touch, we arrive at the ultimate application of sensory brainfluence.
This is where it all comes together.
We come full circle back to the yogurt experiment we started with at the top of the deep dive. We were talking about finding what the neuromarketing researchers call your neurological iconic signature, or NIS.
Right. The NIS. This is the holy grail of sensory branding. It is that one specific, often hidden sensory characteristic of your product that most deeply engages the human brain.
The peak spike.
Exactly. It is the peak spike on the EEC or fMRI scan. For the yogurt, it wasn't the sweet taste of the fruit, it wasn't the visual marbling of the colors.
It was the foil lid.
The NIS was the physical tension, the subtle ripping sound, and the tactile release of grasping and peeling back that foil lid. That was the moment the brain paid the most attention.
It is the defining sensory moment of the experience. And while neuromarketing firms use high-tech brain scanners to find these signatures today, the sources point out a classic, incredibly low-tech example that proves this concept has been around for decades.
Oh, this is a great one.
Even before we have the vocabulary to describe it, Kellogg's Rice Krispies.
That is the perfect example.
Long before anyone had fMRI machines, Kellogg's executives realized a fundamental truth about their product. From a purely culinary standpoint, their puffed rice cereal tasted pretty much like any other generic puffed rice cereal on the market.
It's just puffed rice.
The baseline flavor was not a competitive moat, but what made it entirely unique, its true differentiator, was the specific acoustic property it had when milk was poured over it.
They discovered their auditory NIS.
And they leaned into it entirely. They built a massive, multi-generational global empire, not on the flavor of the grain, but on the sound of snap, crackle, pop. They made the sound the brand.
But let me play devil's advocate here because I can hear the skeptics listening to this right now.
Sure, go ahead.
If that cup of fruit yogurt tastes absolutely terrible, or if it's spoiled, the fact that peeling the foil lid was exciting isn't going to save the product, right?
Obviously not.
If the Kellogg's Rice Krispies taste like wet cardboard, the snapping sound doesn't matter.
So, is the NIS really just the cherry on top of a good product, or is it actually the main event?
What is crucial to understand here is the difference between the prerequisites for entry and the differentiators for success.
Well, explain that.
Baseline quality, meaning the yogurt is safe and tastes good, the cereal is edible, the accounting software accurately calculates taxes, is merely the price of entry into the market.
It's the bare minimum. Exactly. If your core product is terrible, no amount of sensory trickery, uncommon sense, or French accordion music will save it long term. The brain will eventually recognize the functional failure.
Right.
However, in a modern crowded market where dozens of yogurts taste great and dozens of cereals are sweet, baseline quality is not what creates fierce brand loyalty. The NIS is the emotional differentiator.
It's what makes them pick yours.
It is the specific trigger that shifts the brain from passive consumption to active engagement. The crucial lesson from the yogurt study is that the most important product characteristics for building loyalty are very often not the obvious functional ones, like taste or texture.
So if I want to find my own NIS, I need to stop obsessing over the functional features of my product for a minute and deeply observe how my customers actually physically interact with what I offer.
Yes, watch them use it.
I have to hunt for that hidden sensory action. Maybe it's the heavy, deeply satisfying magnetic snap of the case on a pair of premium sunglasses.
Oh, I love that sound.
Maybe it's the incredibly solid, reassuring thud of the door on a luxury car closing, which engineers actually spend millions of dollars perfecting.
They really do.
Maybe it's the specific, high-quality ripping sound of the thick, eco-friendly paper you use to package your shipments. Whatever that moment is, you have to find it, refine it, and amplify it so it becomes your neurological, iconic signature.
And this brings us to the core synthesis of everything we've explored. When you look at all these tactics, the tea tree oil, the French music, the foil lids, the ambient environments, it forces a fundamental redefinition of who the consumer actually is.
What is that redefinition? When we boil this entire massive deep dive down, what is the core truth we are looking at?
The core truth is that human beings are not logical, calculating machines that occasionally feel emotions.
Not at all.
We are deeply emotional, sensing organisms that occasionally use logic to justify what our senses have already decided. Business is not a spreadsheet. It is a multi-sensory environment.
I love that.
The most potent marketing, the most effective communication, and the deepest loyalty building in the world happens entirely in the subconscious. It happens in the limbic system, long before the customer ever thinks rationally about the price tag, the feature list, or the logical value proposition.
If you want to connect with people, you have to bypass the spreadsheet. You have to speak directly to the senses.
The spreadsheet versus the senses. We think we are making choices with the former, but we are entirely driven by the latter. That is a profoundly empowering way to look at how we build things and how we navigate the world.
It really is.
Now that you know how the subtle smell of a room, the tempo of background music, or the sound of a foil lid can literally hack your brain's buying choices, what happens when brands decide to bypass your physical senses entirely and market directly to your psychology?
That sounds intense.
Next time, we are diving into the science of brand loyalty and trust, and uncovering why 10 specific words placed at the very end of an ad can magically increase your customers' trust in you by 33%.
I can't wait for that one.
It's a wild exploration of human psychology. But until then, keep your senses sharp. And the next time you peel a lid off your yogurt, ask yourself, who is really making the choice? What if the choices you make every single day, like the soda you drink, the computer you use, the brand of shoes you wear, what if they aren't actually your choices at all? What if your brain has been literally, physically rewired to prefer them?
Yeah, it's a pretty unsettling thought. I mean, we all walk around fiercely defending our independence, right? Feeling like we are the completely rational captains of our own ships.
You really do. We like to think we're, weighing the pros and cons, reading the spec sheets, doing the math.
Right.
But today, we're doing a deep dive into the neuroscience of branding. We're specifically looking at the research from our sources on this book, Brainfluence, looking at Chapter 4. And you are about to learn how the world's most successful brands basically bypass your logical brain entirely and wire themselves directly into your subconscious.
It's fascinating stuff.
It really is. We are going to explore how seemingly invisible marketing, tribal mentalities, and Pavlovian conditioning dictate consumer behavior. And understanding this isn't just some academic exercise. It's an absolute superpower for anyone interested in business, entrepreneurship, or frankly, just understanding why you buy what you buy.
Because the reality is, if you don't understand the underlying biology of human decision-making, you are basically flying blind in the market. You're trying to appeal to a logical brain that simply isn't in charge.
Yeah, so let's get right into the physical evidence. Because I think it's really easy to dismiss marketing as just like clever psychology, right?
Oh, absolutely.
But the source of material goes straight to the hardware. They look at fMRI scans to see what a brand actually looks like inside the physical tissue of the human brain. And there's this fascinating German study highlighted in the text. And I really want to start there because it completely shattered my understanding of what a brand even is.
Yeah, that study is a great starting point.
Right, so the researchers put subjects into an fMRI machine to watch their brain activity in real time. And then they showed them a mix of like very strong famous brands and weak unknown brands.
And we should probably clarify what we mean by watching brain activity.
Oh yeah, good point.
Because an fMRI, which stands for functional magnetic resonance imaging, it doesn't, read your thoughts.
Right, it's not a mind reader.
Exactly. It detects changes in blood flow.
Yeah.
Your brain is this massive energy consumer, right? So when a specific cluster of neurons starts firing, it needs oxygen, and blood rushes to that area to deliver it.
Makes sense.
So the fMRI literally lets us map the geography of your thoughts by just tracking where the blood goes. And when these German researchers showed subjects the logos of incredibly strong, dominant brands, the blood didn't rush to the analytical, logical centers of the brain.
Wait, really? Where did it go?
It rushed to the areas associated with positive emotions, reward processing, and critically self-identification.
That last part is what completely blew my mind. Self-identification. I mean, the brain isn't just saying, oh, I recognize that company. The brain is firing the exact same neurons it uses to define who you are.
Yeah.
It's literally saying, that company is part of me.
Exactly right. It's an integration of identity. And it's really helpful to look at the contrast here. When the researchers showed those same subjects, the weak, lesser-known brands, those reward and identity centers just stayed completely dark.
Wow.
Yeah. Instead, a totally different network lit up the areas associated with working memory and, surprisingly, negative emotion.
I found that detail so fascinating. I mean, why negative emotion? I would think a weak brand would just, I don't know, elicit neutrality. Like, I don't know this, moving on.
Right.
But the brain actually penalizes it.
It comes down to cognitive burden. The brain is an incredibly selfish organ when it comes to energy. It makes up about, we're at 2% of your body weight, but it consumes 20% of your calories.
That's a huge ratio.
It really is. So it hates working hard. When you show it a weak or unfamiliar brand, the brain has to scramble. It fires up the memory centers, desperately flipping through its internal filing cabinet, trying to figure out, do I know this? Is this safe? Should I care?
Like a computer lagging.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that sheer effort, that lack of immediate, easy fluency, triggers a mild stress response. It's just a biological annoyance.
So an unfamiliar brand literally causes a microscopic stress reaction in the brain of the consumer. It's an actual penalty for making the brain do the work.
Precisely. A strong brand feels like a shortcut to safety and identity, which is rewarding. A weak brand feels like homework, which is stressful.
That beautifully sets up the next study, which is probably the most famous piece of neuromarketing ever conducted. Read Montague's modern recreation of the Pepsi challenge.
Oh, yeah, the classic.
I mean, we all remember those commercials from the 80s, right?
Yeah.
The blind taste tests where random people on the street take a sip of two unlabeled colas, and they always choose Pepsi.
Pepsi used that to hammer Coke for years. But Montague wanted to know what was actually happening beneath the skull during those sips.
Yeah, Reed Montague was the director of the Human Neuroimaging Lab at Baylor College of Medicine, and he recognized that there was this massive discrepancy between the biological truth and the market reality.
How so?
Well, if Pepsi consistently won blind taste tests, meaning the physical product was demonstrably more appealing to the human tongue, why was Coca-Cola still absolutely dominating the market? It didn't make sense.
Right. Coke was still crushing them in sales.
Exactly. So he recreated the Pepsi challenge, but he put the subjects inside an fMRI machine while they drank the soda through a tube.
And the first part of the experiment totally validated Pepsi's entire marketing campaign. I mean, when the tasting was completely blind, the brain's reward center, the ventral striatum, just went crazy for Pepsi.
It really did. It showed 5 times more activity than when they drank Coke. I mean, the tongue detected the sweeter, slightly more citrusy profile of Pepsi, sent the signal up to the brain, and the brain just flooded the system with a chemical reward.
Yeah.
So from a purely biological sensory standpoint, Pepsi was the winner by a mile.
But then Montague did the second half of the experiment, which is honestly where the neuroscience of branding is truly born. He repeated the taste test, but this time he told the subjects what they were drinking.
He didn't hide it.
Right, he showed them the brand before the liquid even hit their tongue, and the results completely inverted. Suddenly, the subjects overwhelmingly claimed they preferred the taste of Coca-Cola.
Which is crazy, but, we see that in psychology all the time. Like, people lie or they try to appease the tester.
Sure, self-reporting is flawed.
Right. But the fMRI showed they weren't lying. Their physical brain activity actually changed. The ventral striatum, that pleasure center that loved Pepsi, was completely overpowered by a different part of the brain.
Yes, the medial prefrontal cortex lit up to a massive degree. This is a region heavily involved in higher cognitive functions, memory retrieval, and, again, self-identification.
So I want to really dig into the mechanism here because this is wild to me. Are you saying that the brand actually overpowers the physical sense of taste?
Yes.
Like, does the brain physically suppress the signals coming from the tongue? It almost acts like a neurological Instagram filter. You aren't tasting the high fructose corn syrup and the carbonated water anymore. You are literally tasting your own identity.
The Instagram filter is a brilliant analogy, really, but we can actually take it a step further biologically. It's a phenomenon called top-down processing.
Okay, what's that?
Usually we think of perception as bottom-up, right? Your tongue detects sugar, sends a signal up the nervous system to the brain, and the brain says, oh, sweet.
Yeah, cause and effect.
But top-down processing means the brain's expectations actively alter the sensory data before you even consciously register it. So when the subject saw the iconic red Coca-Cola logo, their medial prefrontal cortex fired up decades of associations.
Wow.
The nostalgia, the polar bear commercials, the feeling of Christmas, the idea of classic Americana. The brain took all that heavy emotional identity-driven data and basically shouted down the ventral striatum. It altered the biological reality of the liquid on the tongue to match the expectation of the brand.
It alters reality. I mean, the researchers even tried putting Pepsi into the Coke cup.
Right. They did. Yeah.
And it didn't matter. The Coke brand still won. The brain tasted Coke even when the liquid was literally Pepsi.
It did. The brand was physically more powerful than the chemical composition of the product.
Okay, so let's translate this into the real world for a second. If you're listening to this and you're an entrepreneur or you're trying to sell a service or even just pitch an idea, this completely redefines how you should think about competition. If you are out there only competing on features like my software is 10% faster or my coffee has better beans or, my consulting rate is slightly cheaper, you are fighting a losing battle.
You really are.
Because if your competitor has successfully wired their brand into the customer's medial prefrontal cortex, your factual superiority is irrelevant. The customer's brain will literally alter reality to favor the brand they identify with.
That is the harsh truth of neuromarketing. We like to say in the industry that features tell, but identity sells. The logical brain, the prefrontal cortex analyzing all those specs, is just a tiny rider sitting on top of a massive subconscious elephant.
I love that image.
It's so true, though. Most businesses spend all their money trying to convince the writer with spreadsheets and bullet points. But if the elephant has a strong emotional and identity-based connection to a competitor, the elephant is going to walk toward that competitor.
And the writer can't do anything about it.
Nothing. There is nothing the rational writer can do to stop it. The writer will actually just invent a logical excuse to justify the elephant's decision after the fact.
Yeah, like, oh, I bought the more expensive car because of the resale value, right?
Exactly. Total logical alibi for an emotional decision.
So if a brand can hijack our identity like that, the obvious next question is how? How does a company plant that flag in our brain? Because we definitely aren't born with a Coca-Cola neural pathway.
No, we definitely aren't. And to understand how marketers build these pathways, we have to look at neuroplasticity.
Right.
For a long time, the scientific consensus was that the adult brain was relatively fixed. You reached a certain age, and your neural pathways were essentially set in concrete.
You can't teach an old dog new tricks.
Exactly. But modern neuroscience proved that our brains are incredibly plastic. They are constantly physically rewiring themselves based on our experiences. Our source material references the work of neuroscientist Carla Schatz, who summarized this complex mechanism with a famous, simple phrase.
Oh, I know this one. Neurons that fire together, wire together.
That's the one.
I've always loved that phrase. But let's actually explain the mechanism. What does it physically mean for neurons to wire together?
It's a biological process called long-term potentiation. Imagine you have two separate neurons in the brain. One neuron fires when you experience a specific visual stimulus like seeing a logo.
Okay.
Another, completely separate neuron fires when you feel a specific emotion, like intense joy or relief. If you experience those two things simultaneously, both neurons fire at the exact same time.
They sync up.
Right. The brain detects this synchronized firing and it assumes the two events are related. To make the communication faster next time, the brain physically strengthens the synaptic connection between those neurons. It might build more receptors or release more neurotransmitters.
So it's reinforcing the connection.
Exactly. If you repeat this pairing enough times, the connection becomes so strong that firing one neuron automatically triggers the other.
So the brain essentially builds a physical bridge between the logo and the emotion.
Exactly. And once that bridge is built, just seeing the logo forces the emotion to fire, even if there is absolutely no logical reason to feel that emotion in that moment.
Wow. This perfectly explains the study by Dempsey and Mitchell in the text. They wanted to see if they could manufacture a brand preference from scratch in a lab using this exact biological quirk.
Yeah, that was a wild experiment.
So they took subjects and put them in front of a screen, and they rapidly flashed hundreds of images at them, just this rapid-fire slideshow. And amidst this slideshow, they introduced fictitious brand names. Let's just say brand A and brand B.
Right.
Whenever brand A appeared, it was paired with incredibly positive imagery and words. You know, sunsets, smiling families, words like joy, success, and peace. Brand B, however, was paired with negative, stressful imagery.
So they were essentially forcing the neurons for brand A to fire at the exact millisecond. The subject's brain was processing positive emotion. They were manually building that synaptic bridge.
And it happened incredibly fast. I mean, after the slideshow, they asked the subjects which brand they preferred. And consciously, the subjects had no idea. The logical writer on the elephant couldn't recall which brand had been paired with which images.
It was too fast for the conscious brain.
Exactly. But when forced to choose, they overwhelmingly preferred the positively matched brand. The researchers called this the "I like it, but I don't know why" effect.
We experience that constantly in daily life. You walk down the grocery store aisle, you reach for a specific box of cereal, and if someone stopped you and asked for a logical breakdown of why you chose it, you'd struggle.
You'd probably make something up about the color of the box or the font.
Right, but really it's just your pre-wired neural pathways firing.
But here is where the Dempsey and Mitchell study gets a little intimidating and really proves the dominance of this wiring. Because they did a second phase of the experiment.
This is the best part.
They took those same subjects, who are now subconsciously wired to prefer brand A, and they gave them hard, factual, undeniable data. They showed them spec sheets proving that brand A was actually an objectively inferior product. It was functionally worse than brand B in every measurable way.
This is the ultimate test of the rational human. Does hard logic override a subconsciously manufactured emotional preference?
And the answer is a terrifying no. Even when the subjects consciously knew brand A was worse, they still chose it. The researchers even tried to offer financial incentives to make the objectively better choice, and the subject still couldn't overcome the subconscious conditioning.
The emotional wiring simply vetoed the logical fact.
Irrational conditioning beats factual superiority every single time.
It really highlights how deeply ingrained these associative learning mechanisms are. It's pure Pavlovian conditioning. The source material draws the direct parallel to Ivan Pavlov and his dogs.
Right, the classic Psychology 101 example.
Exactly. Pavlov rang a bell every time he fed his dogs. The neurons for the sound of the bell wired to the neurons for digestion. Eventually, he could just ring the bell, and the dogs would physically salivate even if the room was completely empty of food.
Just from the sound.
Right. And a study at Caltech proved we do the exact same thing with corporate symbols. They found that just showing a subject a visual symbol that had been previously paired with a pleasant taste caused the brain's reward center to flood with dopamine.
So when you are driving down the highway and you see the massive golden arches of McDonald's looming in the distance...
Your brain is already tasting the salt and the fat of the French fries.
Oh, man.
The dopamine hit happens before you even pull off the exit. The neurons are permanently wired.
Now, you might hear this and think, okay, that's great for McDonald's or Coca-Cola. They have billions of dollars to run global advertising campaigns to build those bridges. But what I find so fascinating from the deep dive is that you don't actually need $1 billion budget. You just need discipline.
That's a crucial point, yes.
Yeah.
The mechanism of neuroplasticity doesn't care about your budget. It cares about repetition and consistency. The key to Pavlovian branding is ruthless, unwavering consistency over time.
Give us an example.
Well, our sources use the example of Marlboro famously owning the color red in the American consciousness, or how Coca-Cola has relentlessly maintained their specific typography and that exact hex code of red for over a century.
They literally never change it.
They never change it because every time they show it to you, they are thickening that exact same neural cable.
I want to look at a non-visual example from the text because I think it proves how deep this really goes. Singapore Airlines.
Oh, this is an absolute masterclass in sensory branding.
Tell me about it.
Well, Singapore Airlines understands that the olfactory bulb, the part of the brain that processes smell, has a direct, unfettered neural pathway to the amygdala, which processes emotion, and the hippocampus, which processes memory.
So smell skips the line.
Exactly. Smell is arguably the most primal and evocative sense we have. So Singapore Airlines doesn't just rely on visual logos. They actually developed a specific patented scent called Stefan Floridian Waters.
And they put it everywhere.
Everywhere. It's in the perfume worn by the flight attendants. It's infused into the hot towels they hand you before takeoff. It's subtly pumped into the cabin air.
So think about what happens biologically here. You are a frequent flyer. You get on a Singapore Airlines flight, you sit in a luxurious seat, the service is impeccable, you feel relaxed and taken care of. And the entire time, you are breathing in this specific scent.
Right.
So the neurons for the scent wire directly to the neurons for luxury and comfort. Fast forward a few months, you might be in a totally different, highly stressful airport.
Yeah.
But a flight attendant walks past you wearing that perfume.
And boom.
Your brain smells it and instantly subconsciously fires the neurons for comfort. You feel a wave of positive emotion associated entirely with their brand.
It is biological conditioning at its absolute finest, and they achieved it just through consistency.
So the practical takeaway for you listening is this. You do not need a Super Bowl ad to build a neuro brand. You just need ruthless consistency across every single touch point. The way your website looks, the tone of voice your customer service reps use, the specific font on your invoices, the unboxing experience of your physical product.
Every single detail.
Every touch point must deliver the exact same feeling. Because if you rebrand every 2 years because you get bored, or if your marketing is playful but your customer service is incredibly rigid and bureaucratic, you are forcing the brain to fire conflicting neurons.
The wires never connect.
Exactly. You are constantly tearing down the bridge before it's even built.
Consistency builds the neuropathway, and excellence ensures the pathway leads to a positive emotion. It takes patience, but once that wiring is set in the consumer's brain, it is incredibly difficult for a competitor to break it.
Okay, I love the theory here. The biology makes total sense to me. But I want to push back on the premise a little bit because the way we consume media has fundamentally changed. Well, we aren't sitting in front of a TV being forced to watch 3-minute commercial breaks anymore. We use ad blockers on our browsers. We pay for premium tiers of streaming services specifically to avoid ads. When an ad does come on YouTube, our thumb is hovering over the skip in 5 seconds button, and we are completely checked out.
That's true.
So if I am not paying attention, how can you possibly wire my brain? Doesn't this whole Pavlovian model fall apart if the conscious brain simply ignores the stimulus?
It's a very logical objection. In fact, for decades, the entire advertising industry believed exactly what you just said. It was called the attention myth.
The intention myth.
Yeah, the foundational dogma of marketing was that if a consumer doesn't consciously pay attention to an ad, the money spent on that ad is entirely wasted. Attention was literally the only metric that mattered.
Which makes sense logically.
Logically, sure,
Mhm.
but modern neuroscience has completely dismantled that assumption. The source material introduces us to the work of Robert Heath, who developed the theory of low-involvement processing.
Low involvement processing, meaning my brain is recording the environment even when my conscious mind's focused somewhere else.
Exactly. Your brain is a massive data-gathering machine, and conscious attention is just a very, very narrow spotlight. To prove how powerful the darkness outside that spotlight is, the sources highlight this massive, unprecedented study conducted by the research firm Ipsos.
Okay.
They looked at data from 97,000 subjects across 512 different television commercials. They wanted to see if an ad could change a person's perception of a brand based on how much attention they were paying to the screen.
And obviously the people who paid close attention were impacted the most, right?
Right. The data showed that high-attention viewers, people who actively watched the ad and could clearly recall the narrative, had a 7.3% positive shift in their perception of the brand.
Okay, that makes sense. The logical writer watched the pitch and agreed with it.
Exactly. But the researchers didn't stop there. They looked at the ultra-low attention viewers.
Define ultra-low attention. Are these people who just had the TV on in the background while they cooked?
Yes, or people who left the room entirely, or were reading a magazine while the ad played. These were subjects who were so deeply distracted that they couldn't even consciously recall seeing the ad at all. When prompted later, they swore they had never seen it.
Not a single memory of it.
None. Yet, when tested, this ultra-low attention group still showed a 1.2% positive lift in brand perception.
Okay, 1.2% lift from an ad they literally swear they never saw.
Yeah.
That is wild. But let me play devil's advocate for a second. 1.2% isn't very much compared to 7.3%. Is that really enough to move the needle for a business?
You have to look at the math of large numbers here. Yes, on an individual level, 1.2% from a single exposure seems tiny. But remember, this is a lift generated for free, completely without the conscious brain's permission.
Oh, that's a good point.
Now, multiply that 1.2% effect across millions of passive impressions over months and years. You walk past a billboard while looking at your phone. You see a logo on a passing bus. You scroll past a sponsored post without reading it.
It adds up.
It adds up tremendously. The conscious brain rejects it all, but the subconscious is dutifully logging the data, slowly shifting your preferences by fractions of a percent, until one day you find yourself reaching for a specific brand of toothpaste without having any idea why.
It's the ultimate stealth campaign.
Yeah.
But what about fast forwarding? Because the sources bring up a study on that, and it frankly broke my brain.
The Interscope study.
Yeah. When I fast forward a show on my DVR, the commercials are just a hyperspeed blur of colors and shapes. There is no audio, there is no narrative, there's absolutely no time to read the logo. Surely that doesn't work.
You'd think so. But the neuromarketing firm Interscope Research ran a study on this exact behavior. They tracked the biometric and neurological responses of people watching TV normally versus people who were actively fast-forwarding through the commercial breaks.
Yeah.
And the results were completely counterintuitive. The people who fast-forwarded actually recognized the brands in the ads at twice the level of people who hadn't seen the ads at all.
Stop. How is that physically possible? If an ad is playing at 4 times the normal speed, it's just a visual smear. How is my brain reading a logo?
To understand this, we have to look really deep into the evolutionary history of the human visual system. The text introduces a concept that researchers call blind sight, or emotional blind sight. We don't just have one way of seeing the world, we actually have 2 distinct biological pathways.
Okay, lay them out for me.
The pathway we are most familiar with involves the primary visual cortex. This is the high-resolution, slow-processing pathway. You use it to read a book or to consciously examine a painting. It requires focused attention.
Okay.
But we have a second, much older, much faster visual pathway. This primitive system bypasses the conscious cortex entirely and feeds visual data straight into the amygdala, the brain's alarm system.
So it's an evolutionary survival mechanism.
Precisely. Imagine our ancestors on the savannah. If a predator jumps out of the tall grass, you do not have time for your primary visual cortex to slowly process the shape, identify the species, and consciously decide to run.
By the time you do that, you're already dead.
Exactly. So your primitive visual system evolved to detect sudden movement, flashes of color, and basic shapes, and trigger an instant adrenaline response before you even know what you're looking at. This primitive system is highly attuned to rapid changes in the visual field.
Okay, so map that onto fast-forwarding a commercial.
When you are fast-forwarding a show, what are you doing? You are staring intensely at the center of the screen, hyper-focused, waiting for the exact frame where your show comes back.
Right, you're glued to the TV.
Your visual system is wide open, on high alert, and as the commercials blur past, your primitive, high-speed visual pathway is absorbing those flashes of color and high-contrast shapes. And for major brands, what are those shapes?
Oh, wow.
The Nike swoosh, the Target bullseye, the Coca-Cola ribbon. These are highly recognizable primitive shapes. The conscious brain sees a blur, but the primitive brain catches the logo and logs it perfectly.
That is absolutely staggering. We think we are outsmarting the advertisers by skipping the ad, but we are actually just feeding their logo directly into our biological predator evasion software.
It's true.
We are giving them direct, unfiltered access to our subconscious.
It is the ultimate hack, and it is incredibly effective because of another psychological principle discussed in the text, the mere exposure effect, which was discovered by the psychologist Robert Zayonk.
Right, the Chinese ideograph study.
Exactly. Zayonk flashed Chinese ideographs on a screen to subjects who didn't speak or read Chinese. He flashed them for just milliseconds, so fast that the subjects couldn't consciously register seeing them. It was pure subliminal exposure.
Okay.
Later, he showed the subjects a large catalog of symbols and asked them which ones they found most visually pleasing. Time and time again, the subjects consistently preferred the symbols they had been subliminally exposed to.
Familiarity breeds likability.
Exactly. From an evolutionary standpoint, the brain equates familiarity with safety. If you have seen a shape before and you didn't die, the brain assumes that shape is safe and rewards it with a mild feeling of preference.
But let me challenge this application.
Yeah.
Because if I am a marketer hearing this, my immediate thought is, great, mere exposure equals likability. I'm just going to spam my logo absolutely everywhere. I'll make it as loud, aggressive, and intrusive as possible.
Right.
But that can't be right. There has to be a difference between passive exposure and just being incredibly annoying.
There is a massive difference, and it comes down to the context of the exposure. You don't want to be an irritating nuisance. You want to be an ambient, positive presence. The source material provides a brilliant, real-world example of how to execute this perfectly. Samsung.
Oh, the charging stations.
Yes. Have you ever noticed who sponsors the electrical charging stations in major airport terminals?
Yeah, now that you pointed out, it's always Samsung. It's usually this big tower with a bunch of outlets and a prominent Samsung logo glowing right at the top.
Now, analyze the psychology of the consumer in that specific environment. You are in an airport. It is an inherently high-stress environment. You have a digital boarding pass on your phone. You need to call an Uber when you land. And your battery is at 4%.
It's the worst feeling.
You are experiencing legitimate physiological anxiety. Cortisol is pumping through your system. And then, like a mirage in the desert, you see the charging station.
And the relief just washes over you.
The physical and emotional relief you feel the moment you plug that cable into your phone is intense. Your brain stops pumping cortisol and starts releasing dopamine and endorphins. You feel safe again. And right there, bathed in the glow of that biochemical relief, is the Samsung logo.
That is so incredibly smart. I mean, they aren't screaming for your attention. They aren't interrupting a video you want to watch. They aren't asking you to read a list of specs about their new phone. They're just quietly sitting there soaking up the gratitude.
Exactly. Most people don't consciously think, wow, thank you so much, Samsung. But they don't need to. The subconscious brain logs the logo, logs the intense feeling of relief, and fires those neurons together. They are building a deeply positive neuroassociation without the customer ever consciously engaging with the brand.
So synthesizing this for the listener, the myth of attention is dead. Just because someone isn't looking directly at you doesn't mean you aren't making an impact. Find ways to put your brand in front of people in low-stress, highly positive environments.
Yes.
Sponsor a local 5K run. Brand the water station at a crowded summer festival. Create genuinely useful promotional items that sit passively on a client's desk for years. Be a positive ambient fixture in their landscape, not an annoying interruption in their day. Let their primitive visual system do the work for you.
It's the slow, quiet infiltration of the subconscious.
Okay, so we've spent a lot of time in the shadows here. We've talked about subtle, passive, subconscious hacking, wiring the brain while the customer is literally looking the other way. But I want to dramatically shift gears and look at the exact opposite end of the spectrum.
Let's do it.
Let's talk about the rabid, screaming from the rooftops superfans. The people who camp outside stores for 3 days, or literally tattoo a corporate logo onto their physical body. How does a company move beyond passive preference and create a brand that people will actually fight for?
To understand that level of devotion, we turn to Kate Newland's concept of passion brands. These are the rare elite brands that inspire actual evangelism. Their customers don't just consume the product, they actively try to convert their friends and family, and they feel a genuine sense of personal disappointment or even betrayal if someone close to them buys a competitor's product.
Which, if you step back and look at it objectively, is deeply weird behavior. I mean, why on earth do I care what kind of phone my sister uses? I don't own stock in the company. I'm not getting a commission. My phone doesn't work better just because she has one too.
You care because the brand has successfully integrated itself into your social and tribal identity. Her rejection of the brand feels like a rejection of you. And to achieve this level of tribal integration, Newland argues that companies must start from the inside out. They have to hire what she calls passionistas.
Passionistas.
It's a slightly cheesy term, I know, but the concept is profound. These are employees who possess a genuine, authentic, almost irrational passion for the category and the brand. This isn't something you can manufacture in a corporate training seminar.
No, you can't fake it.
Exactly. This kind of authentic enthusiasm is incredibly infectious on a biological level. We possess mirror neurons that literally cause us to reflect the emotional states of the people around us.
The source material mentions the early days of Red Bull as the ultimate example of this, right?
And now, the early Red Bull strategy is legendary. When they first launched, they didn't have the hundreds of millions of dollars required for traditional television campaigns. Instead, they relied entirely on these highly energetic, deeply passionate sales guys.
And their tactics were crazy.
Very guerrilla. They would go into popular, high-energy bars and nightclubs, and they would literally leave crushed, empty Red Bull cans on the tables, in the bathrooms, and around the venue.
They were manufacturing the physical illusion of wild popularity. Like, everyone is drinking this, you just missed it.
Exactly. They were seeding the environment. But the trick only worked because of the passionistas. When these sales reps handed out the product, they genuinely acted like they had discovered the elixir of life. They weren't just pushing a carbonated beverage with taurine in it. They were selling a high-energy, rebellious, extreme lifestyle.
Right.
They embodied the brand, and that authenticity bypassed the consumer's skepticism.
It's the difference between a salesman reading a script and a fanatic sharing a secret.
Precisely. But to really lock in that rabid, tattoo-level fan base, passion isn't enough. You have to leverage a very deep, very old piece of human psychology. The primal need to belong to an exclusive group.
The US versus them dynamic.
Yes. The sources take a deep dive into a famous psychological study known as the Tajfel experiment. Henri Tajfel was a social psychologist, and he wanted to understand the absolute minimum conditions required for human beings to form a tribe and start discriminating against outsiders. In psychology, this is known as the minimal group paradigm.
So he wanted to strip away religion, race, geography, politics, all the usual things we fight over, and see what it takes to actually start a war. How did he test it?
He took groups of teenage boys and had them perform incredibly trivial, meaningless tasks. In one variation, he had the boys look at a screen that briefly flashed a cluster of dots, and they just had to guess how many dots are on the screen.
Okay.
Then Tajfel totally arbitrarily divided the boys into two groups. He told one group, you are the overestimators, and he told the other group, you are the underestimators.
Just to be clear, these labels meant absolutely nothing. It wasn't an intelligence test. It didn't reflect their personality. It was just a random label about dots.
Absolutely meaningless. But then Tajfel gave the boys the ability to allocate small amounts of real money to the other boys in the study. Crucially, they didn't know the personal identities of the boys they were giving money to. They only knew if the recipient was an overestimator or an underestimator.
And what happened?
The results were immediate and shocking. The boys started heavily favoring members of their own group, allocating them more money, and actively penalizing the boys in the other group.
Just based on the dots.
Just based on the dots. And here is the evolutionary reason why. For hundreds of thousands of years of human history, survival depended entirely on being part of a tribe. If you were cast out of the tribe, you starved or were eaten by predators.
There was no going it alone.
No. We are biologically hardwired to seek an in-group, identify with it, and protect it against the out-group, because the out-group represents a threat to our limited resources. The human brain is so desperate for the safety of a tribe that it will latch onto the flimsiest, most arbitrary distinction like overestimating dots, pull up the drawbridge, and declare war on anyone outside the walls.
Okay, this is where this deep dive gets absolutely fascinating to me, because what you are describing is the exact same biological software that drives every political, social, and cultural division we see on the news every single night.
It's the exact same mechanism.
We see this us versus them tribalism tearing societies apart. But what's crazy is that corporate marketers are weaponizing this exact same survival software to sell computers and shoes. Brands are basically replacing geography and religion as tribal markers.
It's a modern tribe.
Right. It used to be that you hated the sports team from the next town over because of a literal river or a borderline. Now, you bond with a total stranger in an airport coffee shop just because you both use a Mac, and you both roll your eyes at the guy struggling with the PC.
That is a perfect observation, and Apple is arguably the greatest master of weaponizing the Tajful experiment in the history of capitalism.
Let's break down how Apple engineered that, because they essentially created an enemy out of thin air.
If you look at the history of Apple's advertising, they almost never spend time talking about the technical specifications of their hardware. They don't talk about RAM or processor speeds. Instead, they define their tribe by pointing a very sharp, mocking finger at the outgroup.
The 1984 commercial.
Yes, it started with their legendary 1984 commercial directed by Ridley Scott. They literally depicted IBM, and by extension, anyone who used a PC as mindless, brainwashed, gray-suited drones marching in miserable unison. And the Apple user was depicted as this vibrant, athletic, colorful rebel who runs in and smashes the system with a sledgehammer.
It is pure Tajfel minimal group paradigm. We are the colorful, creative rebels. They are the gray corporate drones. Pick a side.
They reinforced it a year later with the Lemmings ad. They showed blindfolded business people walking off a cliff one by one, whistling a morbid tune, again mocking the conformity of the PC world. But the absolute masterpiece of this tribal strategy was the long-running Mac versus PC ad campaign.
Oh, I'm a Mac, and I'm a PC. I can perfectly picture the two guys standing against the stark white background.
Notice what they're doing in those ads. They aren't comparing the motherboards, they are comparing the people. The Mac is played by Justin Long. He's young, cool, casual, creative, quick-witted. The PC is played by John Hodgman. He's stuffy, wearing an ill-fitting suit, constantly getting sick with viruses, overly bureaucratic, and hopelessly uncool.
Right.
Apple forced the consumer to look in the mirror and ask a profound identity question. Which of these two groups do I belong to? Am I the cool, forward-thinking creative, or am I the stuffy, outdated bureaucrat?
They made buying a Windows machine feel socially embarrassing. They took a hardware purchase and turned it into an identity crisis. And the brilliance of it is that once you declare yourself a Mac person, your brain aggressively defends that choice to maintain tribal cohesion. Any criticism of Apple feels like a personal attack on your identity.
That's the power of the tribe. You stop evaluating the product rationally, and you start defending your team.
It's not just the tech giants who do this, though. The source material brings up Etsy, which I find hilarious. Because how does an online marketplace for knitted scarves and handmade pottery create a mortal enemy?
Etsy is a brilliant example of applying this strategy to a totally different vertical. Rob Kalin, the founder of Etsy, didn't call himself the CEO. He actively rejected the corporate title and called himself the crafter-in-chief. He positioned the entire platform as a scrappy, artisanal underdog fighting a righteous war against the soulless, mass-produced world of big business suits.
Which is objectively funny, considering Etsy was backed by tens of millions of dollars in Silicon Valley venture capital. They literally were big business.
They absolutely were, but the narrative wasn't about the funding. The narrative was about the tribe. It was the artists, the creators, and the stay-at-home crafters versus the corporate machine. Seth Godin writes extensively about this exact phenomenon in his work on tribes.
What does he say?
Godin argues that traditional top-down brand management is dead. People are inherently lonely, and they don't want to connect with a faceless corporate entity. They want to connect with each other. A truly great brand doesn't just sell a product, it facilitates a community. It gives people a shared story, a shared flag to fly, and crucially, a shared enemy to unite against.
So if you're listening to this and trying to build an audience or a customer base, what does this mean for you? Give your customers a flag to fly. Make them feel like they are part of an exclusive, enlightened group.
Right.
And do not be afraid to pick a fight with the status quo or define an enemy, whether that enemy is a literal competing brand or just an outdated, frustrating way of doing things.
Right.
If you are selling a new piece of scheduling software, your enemy isn't necessarily Microsoft. Your enemy is chaos, missed appointments, and the soul-crushing feeling of losing control of your week. Rally your tribe against that enemy.
Exactly. Find the specific pain point that your tribe suffers from and declare war on it together. Give them an identity, not just a tool.
Okay, we have covered a massive amount of neurological and psychological ground today. We started with fMRI machines, proving that brands physically alter our perception of reality and overpower our senses. We looked at how to manually wire a brain using Pavlovian consistency and sensory cues like smell.
Yeah, the Singapore Airlines example.
Right. We debunked the attention myth and explored how our primitive predator evasion visual system logs logos while we fast forward. And we just broke down how to build an army of tattooed superfans by leveraging our ancient evolutionary urge to form tribes.
It's a comprehensive look at how vulnerable the human brain really is to external influence.
It really is. So I want to ask you to do the impossible. If we have to tie all of these disparate threads, the fMRIs, the dogs salivating, the fast-forwarding, the dots on a screen, into one unifying concept, what is the core insight of this entire chapter?
If we synthesize all this data, the unifying theme is this. Great branding is never an argument, it is an environment.
I like that.
You simply cannot logic someone into loving your company. A list of features, a spec sheet, a price comparison, these are arguments. The conscious writer loves to debate arguments, but the writer isn't in charge. Whether you are using Pavlovian repetition, subliminal exposure, or the US versus them tribal narrative, successful branding is fundamentally about making the customer's massive subconscious elephant feel safe, rewarded, and at home. You create an emotional environment that the brain physically wants to inhabit.
Great branding is an environment, not an argument. I love that. Because at the end of the day, your product's features are just the rational alibi your customer uses to justify the emotional decision their subconscious already made.
Absolutely.
They buy the outrageously expensive sports car because it makes them feel powerful, exclusive, and tribally superior. But when they pull into the driveway, they tell their neighbor they bought it for the engineering precision and the resale value. The logical alibi.
Exactly. We are profoundly emotional creatures who spend our entire lives rationalizing our behavior after the fact.
This has been absolutely eye-opening and a little terrifying.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up, I know you have one final thought to leave the listener with. Somebody chew on.
I do. This research raises a very uncomfortable, lingering question. We've spent this time dissecting just how porous and hackable the human brain really is. We've seen how susceptible our deepest neural pathways are to colors, smells, split-second symbols, and manufactured tribal cues.
Yeah.
So I want you to look around your house, look at the clothes you wear, the coffee you drink, the phone in your pocket, and ask yourself, if our brains are this easily manipulated, how many of your own deeply held preferences, the things you consider absolutely core to your unique individual personality, were actually planted there by a marketer years ago? Are you truly expressing your free will, or are you just running a neurological program that was installed without you ever noticing?
Wow. That is genuinely going to keep me up tonight. Muscle memory for my wallet and maybe even for my identity. Well, now that you know how marketers use invisible cues and tribal loyalties to wire the software of your brain, the question becomes, how does the actual physical hardware of the world change those signals?
It's a great question.
Because it turns out the physical weight of what you are holding in your hands can completely alter how you think about a company. Next time, we're diving into why the simple act of holding a heavy piece of paper or struggling to read a slightly complicated font can drastically alter how much a customer is willing to pay you. It's the fascinating neuroscience of the physical world, and you won't want to miss it.
What you just listened was the beginning of a full audio, way longer, explaining every single chapter of the book. If you would like to keep listening to the end and access to the full audio, you can access it with the link down below in the description and in the pinned comment.